When a billionaire's falling tree threatens to crush a single father's world, he has 48 hours to save them both. But the real danger isn't the storm. At exactly 7:05 a.m. on a quiet Saturday, Ethan Cole's carefully controlled life exploded with the screech of metal against stone. What he found next door would drag him into a weekend that would test everything he'd built alone: his business, his home, and the iron walls he'd placed around his heart. One reckless woman, one dying tree, one ruthless enemy, and a clock that wouldn't stop counting down. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The sound cut through the morning like a blade dragged across concrete, a high metallic shriek that made Ethan Cole's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. He stood at his kitchen window, the steam rising into his face as he stared toward the source of the noise. 7:05 on a Saturday morning. The neighborhood should have been silent except for bird song and the distant hum of sprinklers on timers. Instead, something next door was dying loudly. Ethan set the cup down and moved to the side window, the one that looked directly into the property that had sat empty for 3 months. The sold sign had appeared 2 weeks ago, and he'd been cautiously optimistic. The previous owners had been quiet, retired, invisible. Perfect neighbors for a man who needed his world predictable and his boundaries respected. The woman currently murdering a lawnmower in a cloud of dust and flying gravel was neither quiet nor invisible. She wore designer jeans that had probably cost more than his monthly truck payment, boots that had never seen actual work, and a white linen shirt that was rapidly turning brown from the dust storm she'd created. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that whipped around as she wrestled with the ancient push mower, attacking the overgrown yard like it had personally offended her. It was 7 in the morning, on a Saturday. Ethan watched as she hit another rock. The mower made a sound like a car crash in slow motion, jumped violently to the left, and died with a pathetic sputter. The woman, his new neighbor apparently, kicked the front wheel, then immediately hopped on one foot, clearly regretting that decision. He should go back to his coffee. This wasn't his problem. He had exactly 2 hours before his daughter Mia woke up, 2 hours of precious silence to review the week's invoices, plan next week's jobs, and maybe, if he was lucky, sit in his truck for 10 minutes doing absolutely nothing. His Saturday mornings were sacred, carefully structured, the only time he had complete control over his schedule. The woman kicked the mower again, harder this time, with her other foot. Ethan sighed, grabbed his work boots from by the door, and headed outside. The morning air was cool, touched with the last whisper of spring, before summer's heat would settle over everything like a weight. His lawn was perfect. He'd mowed it Wednesday evening, edges crisp, not a weed in sight. The contrast with the disaster next door was almost painful to look at. She didn't notice him at first. She was crouched beside the mower, examining the blade with an expression of intense concentration, as if staring at it hard enough might reveal its secrets. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30, with sharp features and the kind of flawless skin that suggested expensive dermatologists and a life spent largely indoors. "That's not going to work," Ethan said. She jerked upright, startled, and something flashed across her face. Not embarrassment, but something harder. Annoyance, maybe, at being caught struggling. "I'm aware," she said, brushing dust off her hands. Her voice had a polish to it, East Coast educated, the kind of accent that suggested boarding schools and Ivy League degrees. I'm working on it. The blade's bent, probably cracked the housing too, hitting rocks like that." He nodded toward the yard, which looked less like a lawn and more like a gravel pit with grass growing through it. "You can't mow this. It needs to be cleared first." "I can see that now." She straightened to her full height, which put her at maybe 5'7" without the boots, and met his eyes directly. There was something unsettling about her gaze, too direct, too assessing, like she was cataloging everything about him and filing it away. "You must be the neighbor." "Ethan Cole." He didn't offer his hand. His hands were clean this morning, and hers were covered in dirt and what looked like motor oil. "You just moved in?" "Vivian Hayes, and yes, 3 days ago." She glanced back at the house, and for just a second, something uncertain flickered across her face. The house was a mirror image of his own, a modest 2-story colonial, probably built in the 70s, with good bones but clearly neglected, paint peeling on the shutters, gutters sagging, a crack running down the front walkway. The inspection said the yard needed work. I thought I'd handle it myself. At 7 in the morning? Is that a problem? The uncertainty vanished, replaced by that same sharp defensiveness. I didn't realize there were noise ordinances. There are. Until 8 on weekends. He watched her process that, saw the flush creep up her neck. But that's not why I'm here. If you're planning to keep attacking that mower, you should know the HOA president lives 4 houses down. Mrs. Whitmore. She'll have a violation notice on your door by noon. For mowing my own lawn? For the noise. For doing it wrong. For breathing wrong. Probably. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. She doesn't like change. New neighbors make her nervous. Vivian's expression shifted from defensive to calculating. Are you warning me out of neighborly concern, or is this your way of telling me to shut up? Both. He turned to go, then stopped. Something made him add, and you've got bigger problems than the mower. That oak in your backyard? The big one leaning toward my garage? It's dying. Another good storm, it's coming down. Might want to get someone to look at it before it lands on something expensive. He didn't wait for her response. He'd done his duty, delivered his warning, maintained his boundaries. He headed back toward his house, toward his coffee and his quiet morning and his carefully maintained life. Behind him, Vivian Hayes stood in a cloud of dust, staring at the broken mower and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Inside his kitchen, Ethan forced himself to focus on the stack of invoices waiting on the table. Cole Landscaping had 3 jobs scheduled for the coming week. A spring cleanup in Riverside, a hardscape installation in the new development off Highway 6, and a maintenance contract for the medical plaza downtown. Good work, steady work, the kind of reliable income that kept food on the table and the mortgage paid. Not enough work to qualify as thriving, but enough to survive. That was the story of the last 3 years. He was halfway through calculating material costs for the hardscape job when his phone buzzed. Jenny, his Friday crew leader. Boss, the Martinez job is going to run over. That retaining wall is worse than we thought. Might need Monday to finish. Ethan closed his eyes and did the math. The Martinez job was already operating on thin margins. Another day of labor would eat what little profit remained. But leaving it half-finished wasn't an option, not with his reputation, not in a town where word of mouth meant everything. Do what you need to do. Send me photos of the damage. He set the phone down and returned to the invoices, but the numbers swam in front of his eyes. The math was always the same. More jobs meant more crew meant more overhead meant more risk. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during the year after Mia was born, when he'd expanded too fast and nearly lost everything. Now he ran lean, 1 truck, carefully selected crew, jobs he could manage without stretching too thin. It was working. Slowly, painfully, it was working. The clock on the wall said 7:40. 20 minutes until Mia woke up. 20 minutes of silence before his day officially began. Through the window, he could see Vivian Hayes still standing in her yard, phone pressed to her ear, pacing in small circles. Whatever conversation she was having didn't look pleasant. Even from a distance, he could read the tension in her shoulders, the sharp gestures as she spoke. Not his problem. He had enough problems. At exactly 8 o'clock, he heard the familiar padding of small feet on the stairs. Mia appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair a wild tangle, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since birth. "Daddy, I'm hungry." "Morning, princess." He closed the laptop and stood, the business immediately compartmentalized, filed away. This was his real job, the one that mattered. "Pancakes? With blueberries? Is there any other kind?" She climbed into her chair at the table, the rabbit positioned carefully beside her plate. At 7 years old, Mia was all knees and elbows, growing so fast he could barely keep her in clothes that fit. She had her mother's coloring, that golden hair, those wide blue eyes, but her steady, observant nature was all Ethan. She watched him mix the batter with the same focused attention she brought to everything. "There's a lady outside," she said, in the yard next door. "I know, that's our new neighbor. She looks mad. She's having a rough morning." Mia considered this while Ethan poured the first pancake onto the griddle. "Are you going to help her?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think she needs help?" "Because you're good at fixing things," said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who believed her father could solve any problem. And she broke the lawnmower. I heard it. That's not really our business, sweetheart. But we're neighbors. You said neighbors help each other. Ethan flipped the pancake, watching the bubbles form and pop on the surface. He'd said that, yes, usually in the context of borrowing a tool or accepting a package, not in the context of getting involved in whatever complicated situation Vivian Hayes had clearly brought with her. Eat your breakfast, he said, sliding the first pancake onto her plate. Then we've got errands to run. But even as he said it, he found himself glancing out the window again. Vivian had abandoned the mower and disappeared around the side of her house. Probably smart. Mrs. Whitmore would be making her rounds soon, clipboard in hand, eagle eyes scanning for violations. The pancakes disappeared quickly. Mia ate with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste time at meals because there were better things to do. Ethan was just clearing the plates when he heard it, the sharp, authoritative knock that could only mean one thing. He pulled the door open to find Eleanor Whitmore standing on his porch, dressed like she was headed to a business meeting despite it being Saturday morning. Gray suit, sensible heels, hair sprayed into submission. She was 68 years old and had been HOA president for the last 12 years, ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of procedural propriety. "Ethan, good morning." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to speak with you about your new neighbor." "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." He kept his tone neutral, professional, the same voice he used with difficult clients. "What about her?" "I attempted to introduce myself this morning, but she was quite rude." Eleanor's smile thinned. "I understand she was operating power equipment before 8 o'clock, in violation of our noise ordinance. I've delivered a warning, but I wanted to make you aware of the situation, given your proximity." The translation: she wanted him to know she expected him to keep an eye on things and report back. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," Ethan said. "She just moved in. Probably didn't know the rules yet." Ignorance is not an excuse. The HOA bylaws are provided to every new homeowner at closing. Eleanor shifted her clipboard to her other arm. "But that's not my primary concern. Have you seen the state of that property? The yard is a disaster, completely unkempt, and there's significant exterior damage, the gutters, the paint, the walkway. All of it needs to be addressed. I'm sure she'll handle it. She has 48 hours to bring the property into compliance with our standards, or she'll begin accruing fines. $500 per day until the violations are corrected." Eleanor pulled out a pink paper and handed it to him. "Would you mind delivering this? Since you're neighbors, it might seem less adversarial coming from you." Ethan looked at the violation notice without taking it. "You already gave her one warning this morning. That was for the noise ordinance. This is for the property maintenance violations." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, Ethan. Your new neighbor has purchased a property in a managed community. That comes with responsibilities. If she can't meet them, perhaps she should have chosen a different location. It's been 3 days, and in 3 days, she's already demonstrated a concerning disregard for community standards." Eleanor finally lowered the paper when it became clear Ethan wasn't going to take it. "I'll deliver it myself then. I simply thought you might want to maintain positive relations with her, given the situation." "What situation?" "The tree." Eleanor gestured toward Vivian's backyard. "Surely you've noticed it. It's severely compromised and leaning directly toward your garage. If it falls, the damage would be extensive. I've already documented it as a hazard. Miss Hayes will be required to have it removed immediately. That's included in the 48-hour notice." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had noticed the tree. He'd mentioned it to the previous owners twice, been assured they'd handle it, and then they'd sold the house instead. That tree's been dying for over a year. Why is it suddenly an emergency now? Because now we have a new owner who can be held accountable. Eleanor's smile returned, sharp and satisfied. "The previous owners were elderly and on a fixed income. I exercised discretion, but Ms. Hayes clearly has resources. That vehicle in her driveway is worth more than some people's homes. She can afford to address the hazard she's inherited." There it was, the real issue. Eleanor had decided that Vivian Hayes had money, and money meant she could be pressured, fined, controlled. It was the same pattern Ethan had watched play out with other new residents, the HOA weaponizing bylaws to assert authority, to remind people who really ran this neighborhood. "I'll talk to her," Ethan said. Not because he wanted to help Eleanor, but because he actually did need that tree dealt with. His garage held $20,000 worth of equipment. If that oak came down in the wrong direction, it would wipe out his entire business in one crash. Excellent. 48 hours, Ethan, starting from this morning's notice. Eleanor turned to go, then paused. Oh, and please remind her that any work done on the property requires prior HOA approval. We've had issues with homeowners hiring unlicensed contractors. All work must be properly permitted and inspected. She left him standing there with a pink violation notice in his hand and a sick feeling in his stomach. He knew exactly where this was headed. Eleanor Whitmore didn't just enforce rules, she crushed people with them. And for whatever reason, she'd decided Vivian Hayes was her next target. Mia appeared beside him, still in her pajamas, looking up with those serious blue eyes. Is Mrs. Whitmore mad at the new lady? Mrs. Whitmore's not mad at anyone, Princess. She just takes the rules very seriously. The new lady looked scared when Mrs. Whitmore was talking to her. Ethan glanced toward Vivian's house. Through the window, he could see her standing in what looked like an empty living room, staring at a piece of pink paper identical to the one in his hand. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her posture, the way she held herself like she was bracing for impact. Not his problem. He had his own problems. A business to run, a daughter to raise, a carefully balanced life that didn't have room for complications. He closed the door and went back to his invoices. 20 minutes later, Ethan was loading Mia into his truck for their Saturday errands when he heard the crash. It came from Vivian's backyard. The unmistakable sound of wood splintering, followed by a string of creative cursing that would have been impressive if his 7-year-old daughter wasn't standing right there with her eyes wide. Stay in the truck, Ethan said, and headed next door before he could think better of it. He found Vivian standing beside a ladder that had clearly just collapsed, staring up at her gutters with an expression of pure fury. A section of rotted gutter hung at a dangerous angle, and the ladder lay in pieces on the ground. You okay? Ethan called out. She spun around, and he saw that she'd changed clothes, now wearing work jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days. Her hair was still pulled back, but strands had escaped, and there was a smudge of dirt across her cheek. She looked exhausted, furious, and maybe a little bit desperate. Define okay, she said. Because if okay means not currently impaled by broken gutters, then yes. If it means anything else, absolutely not. Ethan walked closer, examining the damage. The ladder was cheap aluminum, the kind you bought at a big box store for $30. It had folded on itself like cheap aluminum ladder tended to do when you climbed too high on it. You were trying to fix the gutters yourself? The violation notice says I have 48 hours to address all exterior maintenance issues. The gutters are exterior. Therefore, she gestured at the destruction around her. This. At this rate, you're going to put yourself in the hospital before you fix anything. At this rate, I'm going to burn this house down and collect the insurance. But there was no real heat in it, just bone-deep weariness. She sank down onto the back steps, pulling off her work gloves. I'm sorry about this morning. The noise. I didn't know about the ordinance. Mrs. Whitmore explained it to you, I'm guessing. Mrs. Whitmore explained a lot of things, very thoroughly, with visual aids. Vivian's laugh was bitter. 48 hours to fix everything that's wrong with this house, or I start getting fined $500 a day. Do you know how much it costs to fix everything that's wrong with this house? Ethan sat down on the steps beside her, maintaining a careful distance. More than you've got liquid right now. She cut him a sharp look. What makes you think that? Because you're out here trying to fix gutters with a $30 ladder instead of hiring someone. He nodded toward the house. This place has been neglected for years. The previous owners did the minimum to get it sold. You bought a project. I bought a place where nobody knows who I am. The words came out harder than she probably intended, and Ethan saw her pull back immediately, shutting down whatever she'd been about to say. I bought a house. I can handle a house. Can you handle that tree? Vivian followed his gaze to the massive oak that dominated her backyard. It was easily 80 feet tall, probably 100 years old, and leaning at an angle that made Ethan's professional instincts scream. Large sections of the bark were missing, exposing dead wood underneath. Several major branches had already fallen. He could see them in the undergrowth, slowly rotting. The inspector mentioned it, Vivian said quietly. Said it was a concern but not an immediate hazard. I thought I'd have time to deal with it. You're out of time. That tree's going to come down in the next storm. Maybe sooner. Ethan pointed toward his garage. See that building? That's where I keep every piece of equipment I own for my business. If your tree lands on it, I'm out of work. Probably out of business entirely. Vivian turned to look at him fully for the first time, really look at him, and he saw the fear she'd been hiding under all that sharp defensiveness. How much would it cost to remove it? Properly? With a licensed tree service, all the permits, stump grinding, cleanup? Ethan did the math in his head. 8 to 10,000, maybe more given the size and the risk. The color drained from her face. I don't have that. Not right now. I've got money, but it's all tied up in investments and trust structures. Liquidating enough to cover that would take weeks, and I can't. She stopped herself again, but Ethan heard what she wasn't saying. She couldn't risk whatever she was running from finding out where she was. They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers on a back porch, both trapped by circumstances neither one wanted. I could do the yard work, Ethan said finally. The mowing, the cleanup, get it into compliance with the HOA, and I could take down the tree myself, make it safe. I've got the equipment, the insurance, the expertise. Why would you do that? Because if I don't, and that tree comes down on my garage, I'm screwed. He turned to face her. But I don't work for free. You want my help, we'll make a trade. Vivian's expression shifted to something calculating. What kind of trade? I saw your car. Range Rover, current year custom color. I saw your clothes this morning. Probably cost more than I make in a week. You've got money, even if you can't access it right now. Which means you know people, you know business, you know how to market things. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the Cole landscaping website. A basic template job he'd thrown together 3 years ago and never updated. My business is surviving, but it's not growing. I need better branding, better online presence, better marketing. You help me with that, I'll help you with the house. She studied the website, and he watched her professional mask slip into place. Whatever else Vivian Hayes was, she understood business. This is terrible, she said bluntly. Your services page doesn't even have photos. Your contact form is broken, and your logo looks like it was designed in 1995. Is that a yes? That's a this will take more than a weekend to fix. But she was already scrolling through the site, cataloging problems. I'd need to restructure everything. New brand identity, complete website overhaul, social media strategy, probably some professional photography of your work. How long? To do it right, a month at least. I can give you 2 weeks of yard work for 2 weeks of marketing work. Fair trade? Vivian looked from the website to her disaster of a yard to the dying tree that threatened both their properties. Ethan could see her doing the calculation, weighing her options, trying to figure out if she could trust him. If I agree to this, I need your word that you'll actually finish the work, she said. I've had enough people make promises they don't keep. I keep my promises. It's all I've got. Ethan stood and offered his hand. We start tomorrow, Sunday morning, 7 a.m. I'll bring my crew. We'll have this yard HOA compliant by Monday morning. The tree comes down next weekend. She stared at his hand for a long moment, then took it. Her grip was firm, her palm smooth against his calloused one. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. I'll have coffee. Make it strong. It's going to be a long day. He headed back toward his truck, where Mia was watching through the window with unabashed curiosity. He could feel Vivian's eyes on his back, could sense her calculating, assessing, trying to figure out what angle he was working. There was no angle, just a man trying to protect what he'd built, and maybe, despite his better judgment, helping someone who clearly needed it. As he buckled Mia into her car seat, she said, "You're going to help the new lady?" "Just with the yard, Princess. Nothing more." She seems sad. Ethan paused, his hand on the door. "What makes you say that?" "She has the same face you had when Mommy left," said with the brutal honesty of a child who didn't yet understand that some observations were meant to stay private. Like she's trying really hard to be okay, but isn't. Ethan closed the door without responding and climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, he could see Mia watching him with those serious eyes, waiting for an answer he didn't have. His daughter was right, though. Vivian Hayes was running from something, hiding from something, scared of something. He recognized it because he'd been there himself 3 years ago when his wife had walked out without warning and left him holding a 4-year-old and a business that was barely surviving. He'd learned the hard way that you couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved. You could only save yourself, protect what mattered, and keep moving forward. Tomorrow, he'd help fix Vivian's yard because it protected his garage. He'd help remove the tree because it protected his business. Nothing more. That's what he told himself as he drove away, as he ran errands with Mia, as he spent the rest of the day preparing for tomorrow's work. He almost believed it. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan stood in his backyard and looked at the dying oak tree. The moon was bright enough that he could see the lean clearly, could trace the probable fall line with his eyes. Straight toward his garage. Straight toward everything he'd built. His phone rang. Jenny, his crew leader. "Boss, I know it's late, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The Martinez job is worse than we thought. That whole retaining wall needs to be rebuilt from the footer up. We're looking at 3 more days, minimum." Ethan closed his eyes and did the math. 3 more days at their current rate would turn a break-even job into a significant loss. But walking away from a half-finished project would destroy his reputation faster than any financial hit. "Do it right," he said. "I'll figure out the numbers." After he hung up, he stayed there in the darkness, looking at that tree, thinking about tomorrow. Thinking about the woman next door who'd bought a broken house to escape from something she wouldn't name. Thinking about his daughter's observation that Vivian Hayes wore the same expression he'd worn when his world had collapsed. The smart play was to do the minimum. Make the yard safe, remove the tree, take whatever branding help she offered, and maintain his boundaries. Don't get involved. Don't get curious. Don't let anyone pass the walls he'd built. The smart play. The safe play. At 7:05 a.m. tomorrow, he'd find out if he was still capable of playing it smart. Ethan's alarm went off at 5:30 Sunday morning, 2 full hours before he'd told Vivian to expect him. Old habits. He'd learned years ago that the early hours belonged to him alone. Time to think, to plan, to prepare before the world woke up and started making demands. He moved through his morning routine in the dark, not wanting to wake Mia. Coffee first, strong and black, while he loaded his truck with the equipment he'd need. The commercial mower, the edger, heavy-duty rakes, his chainsaw for the preliminary work on smaller branches. His movements were automatic, efficient, the product of 1,000 similar mornings. By 6:15, he was sitting in his truck in the driveway, reviewing his plan. Clear the rocks and debris first, then tackle the overgrown grass in sections. The hedges would need aggressive trimming. The flower beds were salvageable but would require hours of weeding. And that tree, he'd start with the dead branches today. Make it safer. Buy them time to plan the full removal properly. A light came on in Vivian's kitchen window. Ethan watched her move past the window, a shadow against the bright interior. She was up early too. Probably couldn't sleep, dreading the day ahead, wondering if she'd made a mistake trusting a stranger with a handshake deal and no contract. He wouldn't blame her for the doubt. He had plenty of his own. At 6:45, his phone buzzed. Marcus, one of his regular crew members. "Boss, can't make it today. Kid's got a fever. Sorry for the short notice." Ethan stared at the message and recalculated. He'd been counting on Marcus and Jenny to help knock out the heavy work. Jenny was already committed to finishing the Martinez job. Now Marcus was out, which left him working solo on a yard that realistically needed 3 people to finish in one day. No problem. Take care of your kid. He could call in Tommy, his backup guy, but Tommy was unreliable on weekends. Better to work alone than deal with someone showing up late or not at all. He'd just have to move faster, work smarter, maybe skip lunch. At exactly 7 a.m., Ethan knocked on Vivian's door. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting right there. She'd dressed for work, old jeans, a faded college t-shirt, hair pulled back in a braid. Without the designer clothes and the defensive posture, she looked younger, more uncertain. Human. "You're punctual," she said. "I'm always punctual. It's one of my selling points." He gestured toward the yard. "I'm down 2 crew members, so it's just me today. It'll take longer, but I'll get it done." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, that he was telling her straight instead of making excuses. "I can help." You don't need to. I'm not going to sit inside and watch you work all day. Just tell me what to do." She grabbed a pair of work gloves from a table by the door. "I'm not completely useless with manual labor. I had summer jobs in college." "Doing what?" "Administrative work, mostly. Filing, data entry." She caught his expression and smiled slightly. Okay, so maybe I am completely useless with manual labor, but I can follow instructions. And I've got a strong back and a lot of motivation to avoid $500 daily fines. Ethan considered her for a moment, weighing the pros and cons. Having help would speed things up, even if that help was inexperienced. And there was something about the way she'd asked, not entitled, not demanding, but almost tentative, that made it hard to say no. All right, but you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. I don't have time to explain why, and I definitely don't have time to fix mistakes. Yes, sir. She gave him a mock salute that was probably meant to be sarcastic, but came across as nervous. Where do we start? They started with the rocks. Ethan had Vivian work in sections, clearing stones from the areas he'd already marked while he followed behind with the mower. It was mindless, back-breaking work. Bend, grab, throw into the wheelbarrow, repeat 100 times. The kind of work that showed you exactly what someone was made of within the first hour. Vivian attacked it with the same fierce intensity she'd brought to murdering her lawnmower yesterday. No complaints, no breaks, just steady, determined progress. Her technique was terrible. She was bending from the waist instead of the knees, which would leave her barely able to move tomorrow. But she kept going. At 8:30, Ethan called a water break. Vivian straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back, and Ethan saw her wince. She was already feeling it, and they'd barely started. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep bending like that, he said, handing her a water bottle from his cooler. Bend your knees, keep your back straight. Use your legs, not your spine. My spine is very offended by that suggestion, but she took the water and drank half of it in one go. Her face was flushed, her t-shirt already dark with sweat despite the cool morning air. How much more rock clearing? You're about halfway done with your section. Then we move to the next one. There's a next one. There are 4 more next ones. He saw her face fall and added, But you're doing good work. Better than I expected, honestly. She looked at him sharply, trying to figure out if that was a compliment or an insult. What exactly were you expecting? Someone who'd last about 20 minutes before giving up and going inside. I don't give up, said with an edge that suggested a deeper truth behind the words. I might fail spectacularly, but I don't quit. Ethan thought about the broken ladder, the murdered lawnmower, the desperation in her eyes when she'd talked about the 48-hour deadline. No, he said quietly. I don't think you do. They went back to work. By 10 o'clock, the rocks were cleared and Ethan had made serious progress with the mowing. The yard was starting to reveal itself, still rough, still damaged, but beginning to look like something that might pass HOA inspection. Vivian had moved on to the flower beds, pulling weeds with the same intense focus she brought to everything. Ethan was trimming the hedges when he heard her voice. So, are you going to tell me why you're really doing this? He looked down from the ladder. She was sitting back on her heels, surrounded by piles of pulled weeds, watching him with that assessing gaze. I told you why. The tree explains why you offered to help. It doesn't explain why you're out here at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, working alone because your crew couldn't make it, on a job that's probably not worth your time financially. She pulled another weed, examined the roots, tossed it on the pile. You could have just hired someone to take down the tree and let the HOA fine me into compliance. Would have been easier. Ethan climbed down from the ladder and moved it to the next section of hedge. She was right, of course. The smart play would have been exactly what she described. Maybe I'm just a good neighbor. You don't strike me as someone who does things just to be nice. You strike me as someone who calculates risks and makes strategic decisions. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. So what's the strategic decision here? He could deflect, change the subject, maintain his boundaries. Instead, he found himself being honest. The HOA president doesn't like change, doesn't like new people, doesn't like anything that disrupts her sense of control over this neighborhood. If she decides you're a problem, she'll make your life hell until you either conform completely or leave. And you care about this because 3 years ago, I was the problem she decided to focus on. Ethan picked up the hedge trimmer again, needing something to do with his hands. My wife left. Just walked out one morning, said she couldn't do this anymore. The small town, the struggling business, the boring life. She was gone before lunch. I had a 4-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a business that was barely breaking even. He could feel Vivian watching him, listening without interrupting. The house was a disaster. I was working 16-hour days trying to keep the business alive, and Mia was too young to be much help keeping things clean. The yard got away from me. I missed a few HOA meetings. Mrs. Whitmore decided I was bringing down property values. The memory still stung, sharp and immediate. She hit me with violations for everything. The grass was too long, the paint was fading, my truck was parked on the street instead of the driveway. $500 a day, and I was already drowning. What happened? I fixed everything. Spent money I didn't have, worked nights and weekends, got it all into compliance. Paid the fines even though it meant eating ramen for 2 months. He started trimming again, the mechanical buzz of the tool filling the silence. And I learned that in this neighborhood, you either play by Eleanor Whitmore's rules or you leave. There's no middle ground. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "So you're helping me because you know what it's like to be her target." "I'm helping you because your tree is a threat to my garage," Ethan corrected. "Everything else is just context." But they both knew it was more than that. They worked through lunch. Vivian went inside and came back with sandwiches and iced tea, which they ate sitting on her back steps while reviewing progress. The yard was transformed. Not perfect, but respectable. The kind of yard that wouldn't draw violations or complaints. "The hedges look amazing," Vivian said, studying his work. "How did you get them so even?" "Practice. I've been doing this for 15 years. Ethan finished his sandwich and stood. "We're in good shape for the HOA deadline. I'll finish up the edging and do a final cleanup. You should go inside, take a break. You've done enough." "What about the tree?" They both looked at the massive oak. In the afternoon light, the damage was even more obvious. The missing bark, the dead branches, the dangerous lean. "I'll start on the dead branches today, take down what I can safely reach. But the main trunk, the big work, that needs to wait until I can get a full crew and rent the right equipment. Next weekend, probably." "Will it hold until then?" "If we don't get a storm, yeah. If we do," he shrugged. "That's the risk we're taking." Vivian's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and Ethan saw her entire body tense. She didn't answer, just let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then she turned the phone face down on the steps. "Someone you're avoiding?" he asked, then immediately regretted it. Not his business. Maintain boundaries. "Someone I left behind." She said it quietly, staring at the phone like it might explode. "Someone who doesn't understand that no means no." The way she said it made something cold settle in Ethan's stomach. Ex-husband? Ex-fiancé, ex-business partner, ex-everything. She picked up the phone and shoved it in her pocket. "We built a company together. He wanted to take it public, bring in investors, scale up fast. I wanted to stay private, maintain control, grow sustainably. We fought about it for months. Let me guess. He didn't take the disagreement well. He took it very personally. Accused me of holding him back, being afraid of success, letting my emotions override business logic." Vivian's laugh was bitter. "So I bought him out, paid him exactly what his shares were worth, gave him a clean exit, thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. He started calling, then showing up at my office, then showing up at my apartment, always with some excuse. We needed to talk about the transition. He'd forgotten some files. He just wanted closure." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm afternoon. "He never threatened me, never did anything I could take to the police. Just made it very clear that he wasn't going to let me go that easily." Ethan understood now why she'd bought a house in a quiet suburb under her own name instead of hiding in some anonymous city apartment. She was trying to disappear in plain sight, betting that her ex wouldn't think to look for her in a place like this. "He doesn't know you're here?" "Nobody knows I'm here except my lawyer and my accountant. I shut down my social media, changed my phone number, told everyone I was taking a sabbatical to travel." She looked at him directly. "So if anyone comes around asking about me, I'd appreciate it if you played dumb." "I can do that." He hesitated, then added, "But if he shows up and starts causing problems, you call the police. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Is that what you did when your wife left? Called the police?" The question caught him off guard. "That's different." "How?" "She left. She didn't stalk me or harass me or make me afraid. She just left." The old wound never quite healed. One morning she was there, the next morning she wasn't. Found a note on the kitchen counter saying she couldn't do this anymore. By the time I read it, she was already halfway to California. Do you still talk to her? Christmas cards, birthday calls to Mia. She sends money sometimes when she remembers. Ethan picked up his tools, needing to move, to work, to do anything but stand here excavating old pain. She's got a new life out there, new job, new boyfriend, new everything. Mia's just a piece of the old life she left behind. That's terrible. That's reality. He headed toward the tree, toward the work that needed doing. Come on, I want to get those dead branches down before dark. They spent the rest of the afternoon working on the tree. Ethan climbed into the lower branches with his chainsaw, while Vivian stayed on the ground, dragging away the cut branches and stacking them for disposal. It was dangerous work, requiring complete focus, and Ethan was grateful for the excuse not to talk. But he was aware of her presence in a way that made him uncomfortable. The way she watched him work, making sure he was safe. The way she anticipated what he'd need before he asked for it. The efficiency with which she cleared the fallen branches, learning the rhythm of the work. She was smart, he realized. Not just educated, but genuinely intelligent, quick to learn, quick to adapt. And underneath the defensive armor, there was a kindness he hadn't expected. When his chainsaw jammed on a particularly stubborn branch, she didn't make jokes or get impatient. She just handed him water and waited while he worked through the problem. By 6 o'clock, they'd removed every dead branch Ethan could safely reach without specialized equipment. The tree looked better, less immediately threatening, but the main trunk still leaned toward his garage at an angle that made his professional instincts scream. "It'll hold for now," he said, climbing down for the last time. "But we need to get it down next weekend. No exceptions." Vivian looked up at the remaining structure, and Ethan saw the fear flicker across her face again. "What if it doesn't hold? What if there's a storm?" "Then we both have a problem." He started packing up his tools, his body reminding him that he'd been working for 11 straight hours. But worrying about it won't change anything. All we can do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. She helped him load the tools into his truck, neither of them talking, both exhausted. When everything was packed, Vivian pulled out her phone and opened a banking app. "What do I owe you for today?" "Nothing. We had a deal, remember? I do the yard work, you do the marketing work. That deal was for basic yard maintenance. What you did today was way beyond basic." She pulled up a payment screen. "At least let me cover your crew costs since they couldn't make it." "The deal stands. No money." Ethan closed his truck bed. "But I do expect you to hold up your end. That website redesign, the branding work, I need it done right." Something shifted in her expression, and for the first time that day, he saw the professional mask slip back into place. The billionaire who'd built a company, who understood business negotiations and strategic thinking. "I'll need access to all your current marketing materials," she said. "Website logins, social media accounts, any print materials you use. Also photos of your completed projects, before and after shots if you have them. And I'll want to interview you, get a sense of your brand voice, your target market, your competitive advantages." "I don't have photos. I just do the work and move on to the next job." She stared at him like he'd just admitted to operating without a business license. "You don't document your work? At all?" "I've got some stuff on my phone. Random shots I took for estimates or to show clients' progress. Send me everything you have. And starting tomorrow, you're going to photograph every single job. Before, during, and after. Multiple angles. Good lighting." She was already making notes on her phone, her exhaustion apparently forgotten. "We'll create a portfolio section on your new site, probably an Instagram account to showcase your work. Do you have any customer testimonials? People say nice things sometimes." "Written testimonials, reviews, anything documented?" "No." She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Okay, we're starting from scratch." "That's fine. That's actually better in a way. No bad habits to break." She looked up at him. "When can we do the interview? I need at least an hour, maybe 2, to really dig into your brand identity." "I've got Mia all week. Evenings are tough." "Lunch? I could come to one of your job sites." Ethan thought about his current schedule, the Martinez job running over, the hardscape installation, the maintenance contracts, all of them barely profitable, all of them demanding every minute of his attention. Taking 2 hours out of his day for an interview felt impossible. But then he thought about his current website, about the jobs he'd lost to competitors with better online presence, about the slow, grinding struggle to grow a business when nobody could find you online. Wednesday, he said, I've got a maintenance job at the medical plaza. Low key, mostly just keeping things tidy. I can take a break for lunch. Wednesday works. She saved the note, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Thank you. For today. For all of this. I know you said it's about the tree in the garage, but... She stopped, struggling with words. I was drowning yesterday. I didn't know how I was going to fix everything in time. You didn't have to help, but you did. We had a deal. The deal didn't require you to work 11 hours on a Sunday. The deal didn't require you to be kind when I clearly have no idea what I'm doing. The deal didn't require you to share your story about your wife, about the HOA, about any of it. She met his eyes. So thank you. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He settled for a nod and climbed into his truck. As he backed out of her driveway, he could see her in his rearview mirror, standing in her now respectable yard, watching him leave. She looked small and alone and tired, and something in his chest twisted uncomfortably. Not his problem. He'd done what he came to do. Maintained his boundaries, kept it professional. He almost believed it. When he got home, Mia was waiting on the porch with Mrs. Chen, the retired neighbor who watched her when Ethan had to work weekends. Daddy! Mia launched herself at him, and he caught her easily, ignoring the protest from his exhausted muscles. Did you fix the new lady's yard? We fixed it together. It looks good now. Mrs. Chen says the new lady is very pretty. Ethan shot Mrs. Chen a look. She smiled innocently. Mrs. Chen was 72 years old and had been trying to set him up with every single woman in a 5-mile radius since his wife left. The new lady needed help with her yard, Ethan said firmly. That's all. Mrs. Chen gathered her things. Well, she certainly needed someone with strong arms and a kind heart. Funny how those two things ended up right next door. After she left, Ethan made dinner while Mia chattered about her day with Mrs. Chen. They'd gone to the park, fed the ducks, made cookies. Normal, safe, predictable 7-year-old activities. But over dinner, Mia asked, Is the new lady going to be our friend now? She's our neighbor. That's different from a friend. Why? Because friends required letting people in. And Ethan had learned the hard way that letting people in meant giving them the power to leave and destroy you when they did. Because friendship meant vulnerability, and he couldn't afford to be vulnerable when he had a daughter depending on him and a business barely holding together. Because friends take a long time to make, he said instead. And we just met her. Mia considered this while she ate her chicken. I think she needs a friend. She has the sad face. Out of the mouths of babes. Ethan changed the subject. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and went through the photos on his phone, looking for anything that might work for Vivian's portfolio project. He found 24 images, maybe, random shots of finished landscaping jobs, a few before and after comparisons he'd sent to clients, nothing professional or curated. This was what he had to work with. This was what Vivian had to transform into a brand that could compete with established companies that had actual marketing budgets and professional photographers. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Vivian. Got your number from the business card you left. Just wanted to send you this. A photo appeared. The yard, taken from her front porch, golden in the evening light. It looked clean, maintained, welcoming. Like a home instead of a disaster. Thank you. You saved me today. V. Ethan stared at that message for longer than he should have. Then he saved her number and went to bed, telling himself that everything was still under control, still professional, still safely within the boundaries he'd established. The week that followed proved him wrong on all counts. Monday morning, he got a call from the Medical Plaza Management Company. They were terminating his maintenance contract, effective immediately. No explanation, just a curt notification that they'd decided to go with another provider. That was $3,000 a month he'd just lost. $3,000 he'd been counting on to cover overhead while he tried to grow the business. He called Jenny, who was still at the Martinez job. How much longer? Another day, maybe 2. This wall is worse than we thought, boss. I'm sorry. He called his other regular clients, checking to make sure they were happy, that there were no problems. that his other contracts weren't about to evaporate. Everything was fine, except for the medical plaza, which had given him no warning and no real reason. Tuesday, he drove to the medical plaza after hours just to look at the property. The landscaping was immaculate. He'd made sure of that. No weeds, perfectly edged seasonal flowers rotated on schedule. There was no reason to drop him except that someone else had undercut his price. This was how it worked in a small town. Some company from the city would come in, offer rock-bottom prices to steal contracts, then jack up the rates after a few months or deliver garbage work. Ethan had seen it happen a dozen times, but knowing the pattern didn't help when he was the one being undercut. Wednesday morning, he was at his hardscape installation job, setting pavers in the summer heat, when Vivian showed up at exactly noon. She'd dressed professionally, slacks, a blouse, low heels. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not at a construction site. She was carrying 2 coffees and a bag from the sandwich shop downtown. "Lunch meeting," she announced. "I brought caffeine and food. Do you have somewhere we can sit?" Ethan's crew, Tommy had finally shown up along with a new guy named Carlos, watched with undisguised curiosity as he led Vivian to his truck. They sat in the cab with the windows down, the lunch bag between them. "I did some research on your business," Vivian said, pulling out a tablet. "Checked your online presence, looked at your competition, analyzed market positioning. Want the good news or the bad news first?" "Bad news." Your online presence is almost non-existent. Your website is buried on page 5 of search results. You have 17 reviews across 3 platforms, which is way below average for a business your size. Your social media is dead. Last Instagram post was 18 months ago, and it was a blurry photo of a lawnmower. She swiped through screens filled with data and analysis. Basically, if someone doesn't already know about you through word of mouth, they're never going to find you. Ethan had known all of this, but hearing it laid out so clinically still stung. And the good news? The 17 reviews you do have are glowing. 5 stars across the board, lots of detailed testimonials about quality work, reliability, fair pricing. Your reputation among people who know you is stellar. She pulled up a spreadsheet. So the problem isn't your work. It's visibility. Nobody knows you exist. I've gotten by on referrals. Referrals are great for survival. They're terrible for growth. She leaned back, studying him. "Tell me about your ideal client. If you could pick the perfect customer for Cole Landscaping, what would they look like?" Ethan thought about it. Someone who values quality over speed, who understands that good work costs money and takes time, who wants a relationship with their contractor, not just the cheapest bid. Residential or commercial? Both, but residential is more profitable if I can get the right clients. What's the average lifetime value of a good residential client? I've never calculated that. Vivian made a note. We're going to calculate it. We're also going to identify your competitive advantages, develop a clear brand message, and create a marketing strategy that positions you as the premium choice in your market. She looked up. But I need you to be honest with me. Do you want to grow this business, or do you want to keep it small and manageable? The question cut straight to the heart of the fear he'd been carrying for 3 years. What's wrong with small and manageable? Nothing, if that's actually what you want. But I don't think it is. She gestured toward the job site where Tommy and Carlos were watching them while pretending not to. You're working an installation job that's barely profitable because you're afraid to hire more people. You're trying to do everything yourself because you don't trust anyone else to care as much as you do. You're leaving money on the table every single day because you're scared of making the same mistakes you made before. You don't know what mistakes I made before. I know you almost lost everything. I know your wife left because she couldn't handle the struggle. I know the HOA nearly crushed you when you were already down. Her voice was gentle but relentless. And I know that kind of trauma makes you careful, makes you risk-averse, makes you choose safety over growth every single time. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You've known me for 4 days. I've known people like you my whole life, people who got burned and decided never to risk the fire again. She closed the tablet. I'm not judging you, I get it. But if you want me to help you grow this business, you're going to have to decide if you're ready to actually grow. Because half measures won't work. Either we do this right, or we don't do it at all. They sat in silence, the summer heat pressing in through the open windows. Ethan could hear his crew working, the sound of pavers being set, the scrape of tools against stone. "I want to grow," he said finally, "but I can't afford to fail. I've got Mia depending on me. I've got a mortgage, overhead, insurance. I can't take risks that might blow up in my face." "Then we'll take smart risks, calculated risks, risks with contingency plans and exit strategies." Vivian pulled out a contract she'd apparently drafted. "I'm proposing a 6-month engagement. I'll handle all your branding, marketing, and online presence. In exchange, you continue to handle the tree removal and any other landscaping work I need. We'll track metrics monthly: website traffic, lead generation, conversion rates, revenue growth. If we're not seeing results by month 3, we reevaluate." Ethan read through the contract. It was thorough, professional, exactly the kind of document someone with her background would produce. "What's your success rate with this kind of project?" "Honestly, I've never done this before." He looked up sharply. "What?" "I've built brands for tech companies, helped with product launches, advised on market positioning, but I've never worked with a small local contractor before." She met his eyes. "This is new territory for both of us, which means we're both taking a risk. I'm just more comfortable admitting it." Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling. "At least you're honest." "Always. It's one of my more annoying qualities." She held out a pen. "So what do you say? Ready to take a smart, calculated risk?" Ethan took the pen and signed the contract before he could think better of it. Over the next 3 days, Vivian Hayes invaded his business with the same intensity she'd brought to clearing rocks from her yard. She set up a professional email account to replace the Gmail address he'd been using. She created social media accounts and actually posted to them photos of his work, customer testimonials, before and after shots. She redesigned his logo, his business cards, his truck magnets, and she made him take photos. Dozens of photos. Every job, every angle, every stage of the process. "Instagram is visual," she explained, directing him to photograph a retaining wall from 3 different positions. "People need to see your work to understand the value. Stop being embarrassed and start documenting." She showed up at his job sites unannounced, interviewing his clients about their experience with Cole landscaping. She got testimonials, referrals, and permission to use their properties as portfolio pieces. She was shameless in a way that made Ethan uncomfortable, but also grudgingly impressed. By Friday, his new website was live. It was clean, professional, mobile-optimized, and filled with the photos she'd forced him to take all week. The before and after gallery alone was worth whatever he was paying her in tree removal labor. Except he wasn't paying her. That was the strange part. This was supposed to be an equal trade, but what she was giving him felt disproportionately valuable. He said as much when she stopped by Friday evening to show him the analytics from the first week. "Your website has had 300 unique visitors in 5 days, she said, showing him the dashboard. 12 people filled out your contact form. That's a 4% conversion rate, which is actually pretty good for a new site." "And what did you get out of this week?" Ethan asked. "I haven't even scheduled the tree removal yet." "I gotta remember why I loved this work." She said it quietly, almost to herself. Building something from nothing, solving problems, seeing immediate results from strategic thinking. She looked up at him. "I spent the last 3 years fighting with my ex about scaling and investors and market share. I forgot that the best part of business is just helping people succeed." Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. "Eleanor Whitmore." He answered on speaker. "Ethan, we need to talk. I've received a complaint about illegal business activity being conducted from Ms. Hayes' property. Specifically, allegations that she's operating an unlicensed consulting business from her residence in violation of our commercial activity restrictions." Eleanor's voice was crisp, professional, and utterly implacable. "I'm required to investigate all complaints. I'll need to inspect her property tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Make sure she's available." The line went dead. Ethan and Vivian stared at each other across his kitchen table. Through the window, they could see her house, her now perfect yard, her temporary sanctuary. Who would complain? Vivian asked, but they both knew the answer. Eleanor Whitmore had found her weapon, and she was preparing to use it. The silence that followed Eleanor Whitmore's call felt heavy enough to crush. Ethan watched the color drain from Vivian's face as the implications settled over both of them like falling ash. "She can't actually do this," Vivian said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm not running a business from my home. I'm helping a neighbor. That's not illegal. It doesn't matter what's actually happening. What matters is what she can make it look like. Ethan stood and paced to the window, looking out at the gathering darkness. She's going to come in with her clipboard and her bylaws and find a way to make this stick. That's what she does. But I have documentation, the contract we signed. It's clearly a trade agreement between neighbors, not a commercial enterprise. You think she cares about documentation? She'll call it a consulting business operating from a residential property. She'll say you're providing professional services for compensation, which violates the zoning restrictions. He turned back to face her. And even if we fight it and win eventually, the process will take months. Months of fines. Months of violations on your record. Months of her making your life miserable. Vivian's hands were shaking. She clasped them together on the table, knuckles white. So what do I do? We could stop. Call off the arrangement, tell her it's over, hope that satisfies her. And then what? My website goes back to being invisible? Your tree still threatens your garage? We both just accept that she gets to control everything? The fear in Vivian's eyes was hardening into something else. Anger. Defiance. I didn't leave my ex and everything I built just to let some petty tyrant dictate how I live. Ethan recognized that look. He'd worn it himself 3 years ago, right before Eleanor Whitmore had systematically destroyed his defiance and taught him the cost of resistance. I need to think, Vivian said, standing abruptly. I need to figure out how to fight this. Vivian, thank you for the warning. I'll handle the inspection tomorrow. She was already moving toward the door, retreating into herself, pulling up the armor she'd worn when she first arrived. This isn't your problem to solve. Like hell it isn't. She's using me to get to you, using our agreement as the weapon. Ethan followed her to the door. We're in this together now, whether you like it or not. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, her back to him. I don't want you to lose your business because of me. Then help me understand what we're dealing with. What exactly did you do for me this week that Eleanor could claim is professional consulting? Vivian turned and he could see her mind working, cataloging, assessing. Website design, brand development, social media strategy, client interviews, content creation, analytics setup. She closed her eyes. Everything. I did everything a professional marketing consultant would do. And you have invoices, documentation showing this was a trade, not a paid service? I have the contract, but that's it. She met his eyes. I didn't invoice you because we agreed on a trade. I didn't track hours because I wasn't billing you. I just did the work, which meant Eleanor could argue that Vivian was operating a consulting business and simply hiding the financial transactions. The perfect violation, impossible to definitively disprove. Go home, Ethan said quietly. Get some rest. We'll figure this out tomorrow. But after she left, he stood at his window watching the lights come on in her house, and he knew there was no good solution. Either they ended the arrangement and Eleanor won by intimidation, or they fought and Eleanor won by process. The only variable was how much damage she'd inflict along the way. His phone buzzed, a text from Jenny. Martina's job is finally done. Only ran 2 days over. Moving to the hardscape tomorrow. You good? No. He wasn't good. He just lost a major maintenance contract, possibly lost his license if Eleanor pushed the illegal business angle hard enough. And he dragged his neighbor into a war she didn't understand and couldn't win. I'm good. See you tomorrow. He checked on Mia, sleeping soundly, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, and then spent the next 2 hours researching HOA bylaws and zoning restrictions, looking for any loophole, any precedent, any argument that might work. He found nothing that would help. The bylaws were clear: no commercial activity in residential properties without board approval. And the board was Eleanor Whitmore. At midnight, he gave up and went to bed, but sleep didn't come. He lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around him, thinking about Vivian alone next door, probably doing the same thing. Both of them trapped in a situation that had seemed so simple a week ago. Help with a yard in exchange for help with marketing, a straightforward trade between neighbors. Except nothing was ever that simple. Morning came too early. Ethan was up at 5:30, making coffee and reviewing his schedule, trying to focus on the work he could control. The hardscape installation was behind schedule. The Martinez job had eaten his profit margin. He needed to line up new contracts to replace the medical plaza, and fast. At 8:30, he saw Eleanor Whitmore's silver sedan pull up in front of Vivian's house. She emerged with her clipboard, accompanied by two other people, a man in a suit who was probably the HOA attorney, and a woman with a camera. They were documenting everything, building their case with professional thoroughness. Ethan's phone rang. Vivian. She brought a lawyer and a photographer. I know. I can see them from my window. What do I do? The fear was back in her voice, cutting through the anger. Just let them in? Do I need my own lawyer? Let them in. Be polite. Answer questions directly, but don't volunteer information. Don't admit to anything that could be used against you. He paused. And Vivian? Don't let her intimidate you. That's her whole strategy. Easy for you to say. You're not the one under investigation. I've been exactly where you are. I know how this feels. Just breathe and get through it. The call ended. Through his window, Ethan watched Vivian open her door and let Eleanor's delegation inside. He should go back to his own business, trust Vivian to handle herself, maintain the boundaries he'd fought so hard to establish. Instead, he texted Jenny that he'd be late to the job site, dropped Mia at Mrs. Chen's house, and positioned himself in his backyard where he could see Vivian's property without being obvious about it. The inspection lasted 45 minutes. Ethan watched through the windows as Eleanor moved from room to room, the photographer documenting everything, the lawyer taking notes. He saw them spend extra time in what looked like Vivian's home office, saw Eleanor pointing at things while the photographer captured images. When they finally emerged, Eleanor looked satisfied. Vivian looked like she'd been gutted. Ethan waited until Eleanor drove away, then headed next door. Vivian answered his knock looking pale and shaken, a pink citation notice in her hand. They found my laptop open with your website analytics dashboard visible. Found my notebook with branding notes for Cole Landscaping. Found draft social media posts on my desk. She handed him the citation. I'm being fined $500 per day for operating an unlicensed business, plus an additional $500 per day for conducting commercial activity in a residential zone. Effective immediately. They've scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks from now to determine if the violations warrant further action. Ethan read the citation, his jaw tightening with every word. $1,000 per day. $14,000 before she'd even get a hearing. And the hearing was just formality. Eleanor had already made her decision. This is insane. This is a clear abuse of power. This is legal. Vivian's voice was hollow. I read the bylaws last night. She's within her rights to enforce them. The fact that she's enforcing them selectively doesn't matter unless I can prove discrimination, which I can't. So what are you going to do? Pay the fines until the hearing. Hope I can convince the board to be reasonable. She laughed bitterly. Or just sell the house and leave. Cut my losses before this gets worse. You're not leaving. Why not? I've been here 2 weeks. I don't have roots here. I don't have anything tying me to this place except a falling down house and a neighbor who tried to help me and ended up making everything worse. The words stung more than they should have. I didn't make this worse. Eleanor did. You gave her the ammunition. If we hadn't made that deal, if you'd just left me alone to figure things out on my own, you'd have been fined for the yard violations anyway. You'd still have the tree threatening to fall. You'd still be drowning in problems you didn't know how to solve. Ethan stepped closer, forcing her to meet his eyes. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because you needed help and I could provide it. Don't rewrite history just because it got complicated. Vivian's anger crumbled, leaving only exhaustion. I'm sorry. You're right. This isn't your fault. She sank down on her porch steps. I'm just scared. I've got enough money to pay the fines for a while, but not forever. And if she wins at the hearing, if she gets my house classified as a commercial property or gets me evicted for violations, she won't. You don't know that. I know that I'm not going to let her crush you the way she tried to crush me. Ethan sat down beside her. 2 weeks until the hearing. That gives us time to prepare, to build a defense, to find witnesses who will testify that this is a personal vendetta, not legitimate enforcement. Who's going to testify against the HOA president? Everyone in this neighborhood is terrified of her. Not everyone. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. Mrs. Chen next door? She's been fighting Eleanor for years over her garden gnomes. Tom Rodriguez 3 streets over? She fined him into bankruptcy over a fence dispute. The Patels, the Johnsons, the Kramers, she's made enemies. We just need to find them and convince them to speak up. For the first time since the inspection, something like hope flickered across Vivian's face. You think that could work? I think it's better than giving up. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, we've got work to do. They spent the weekend building their case. Ethan reached out to every neighbor he knew who'd had conflicts with Eleanor, while Vivian compiled documentation of their agreement. The contract, emails, text messages, anything that showed their arrangement was a legitimate trade between neighbors. Some people refused to get involved. The fear Eleanor had cultivated over years of enforcement ran deep. But others, the ones who'd been burned badly enough to still carry grudges, agreed to provide statements. Mrs. Chen offered to testify about selective enforcement. Tom Rodriguez provided documentation of his fence dispute. The Kramers shared their story about being fined for Christmas decorations that other houses had displayed without consequence. By Sunday evening, they had 8 people willing to speak at the hearing. Not a majority, not even close, but enough to establish a pattern of discriminatory enforcement. It's a start, Vivian said, reviewing their collected evidence on her laptop. They were working at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents and empty coffee cups, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. But we need more. We need to prove that what I did for you doesn't constitute a commercial business. What if we get character witnesses? People who've hired me for legitimate work, who can testify that I paid them normally, that your work was clearly different? That could help. But Eleanor will argue that the payment method doesn't matter, that I provided professional services in exchange for compensation, which is the definition of business activity. Ethan leaned back in his chair, frustrated. There has to be a precedent for this. Neighbors help each other all the time. Someone watches your kids, you mow their lawn. Someone fixes your computer, you bake them dinner. That's not running a business. But those are casual favors, not formalized agreements with documentation. Vivian pulled up the contract they'd signed. This is detailed, professional, legally binding. Eleanor will use our own thoroughness against us. They worked in silence for a while, both searching for the angle that would make their case unassailable. Outside, the light was fading, painting the kitchen in shades of amber and shadow. Ethan found himself acutely aware of Vivian's presence, the way she chewed her bottom lip when she was concentrating, the fierce intelligence in her eyes as she analyzed their options, the determination that kept her fighting even when everything seemed stacked against her. Tell me about your ex, he said suddenly. She looked up, startled. What? Your ex-fiancé, the one you're hiding from. Is he the type to escalate if he doesn't get his way? Why are you asking me this? Because I'm wondering if Eleanor got an anonymous tip about your business activity, and I'm wondering who might have motivation to cause you problems in your new life. Vivian's expression went very still. You think David found me? It's possible. You said nobody knows you're here except your lawyer and accountant, but there are other ways to find people. Property records are public. If he was looking, he doesn't know I bought a house. I used a trust for the purchase specifically to keep my name off public records. But doubt had crept into her voice. But he could have hired someone. A private investigator could have traced me through other means. Would he do that? I don't know, maybe. He was always obsessive about control, about not letting go of things that mattered to him. She stood and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. I thought I'd covered my tracks. I thought I'd been so careful. Ethan joined her at the window. Even if he did find you, even if he somehow tipped off Eleanor, that doesn't change our defense. We still have to prove our arrangement was legitimate. But it adds another layer of danger, because if David knows where I am, he's not going to stop with an anonymous tip. He's going to... She stopped herself, but Ethan heard the fear beneath the words. He's going to show up. Yes. Then we prepare for that too. He said it with more confidence than he felt. Security cameras, maybe? Documentation of any harassment. A restraining order if he makes contact. I tried getting a restraining order before I left. The judge said there wasn't enough evidence of threat. David's too smart to make overt threats. He just makes everything gradually worse until you break. She turned to face him. Why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about the tree anymore. It's not even about the marketing work. You're risking your business, your relationship with the HOA, your standing in this community. For what? A neighbor you barely know? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Ethan could deflect, could retreat behind professional boundaries and practical justifications. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Because 3 years ago, when my wife left and Eleanor came after me, I was alone. Nobody helped me. Nobody spoke up. Nobody told me that what was happening wasn't normal or fair. He met her eyes. I got through it, but barely. And I told myself that if I ever saw someone else in that position, I wouldn't leave them to fight alone. That's not the whole reason. No, it wasn't. The whole reason was more complicated, tangled up in his attraction to her strength, his admiration for her refusal to quit, his growing need to protect something that felt increasingly important. But admitting that meant admitting he'd let her past the walls he'd built, and he wasn't ready for that conversation. "It's enough of a reason," he said. Before Vivian could respond, the sky outside flashed brilliant white. Thunder followed seconds later, a deep rumble that rattled the windows. They both turned to look as the first drops of rain began to fall. "The weather service said possible storms tonight," Vivian said. "But I didn't think—" The rain intensified, going from scattered drops to a deluge in seconds. The wind picked up, bending the trees in her yard at alarming angles. And somewhere in the chaos, Ethan heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the sharp crack of wood beginning to fail. He ran to the back window just in time to see a massive limb tear away from the oak tree. It crashed into Vivian's driveway, bringing down power lines with it. Sparks erupted where the lines hit the wet pavement, and Vivian's car, parked directly in the path, was pinned under the fallen branch. "Stay inside," Ethan commanded, already moving toward the door. "Don't go near the downed lines." "Where are you going?" "To make sure nobody else gets hurt." He grabbed his phone and dialed emergency services while running out into the storm. The rain was torrential, visibility nearly zero, but he could see the live power line writhing on the ground near Vivian's car, throwing sparks with each contact. The dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? Downed power line at 847 Maple Street. Large tree branch across the driveway. Live electrical hazard. No injuries yet, but we need the power company and fire department immediately. Sir, stay away from the downed lines. Emergency crews are being dispatched. Ethan was already assessing the situation. The main trunk of the oak was still standing, but barely. The stress of losing the limb had destabilized the entire structure. In this wind, the whole tree could come down at any moment. And when it did, it would fall directly onto his garage. He ran back to his property, threw open his garage, and started his truck. If he couldn't stop the tree from falling, he could at least move his equipment out of harm's way. He backed the truck out, drove it to the street, then ran back for his trailer full of tools. The wind was screaming now, driving the rain horizontal. Lightning forked across the sky every few seconds, turning the world into a nightmare strobescape. Ethan could hear emergency sirens in the distance, but they weren't close enough. Nothing was happening fast enough. He got the trailer out just as another crack split the air. A second limb was failing, larger than the first. It fell in slow motion, crashing through Vivian's fence and into the narrow gap between their houses. Ethan looked up at the main trunk, saw it swaying, and made a decision he knew was probably stupid but felt necessary anyway. He grabbed his chainsaw from the truck, checked that it was fueled, and headed for the tree. "What are you doing?" Vivian was on her porch, screaming to be heard over the storm. "Get away from there." "If I can cut the right branches, I can control the fall direction." He had maybe 10 minutes before the whole structure came down. Maybe less. "Get back inside." "You're going to get yourself killed." Probably. But if he did nothing and the tree destroyed his garage, he'd lose everything anyway. At least this way he had a chance to save it. He fired up the chainsaw and went to work. The physics of tree removal in a storm were insane. Every cut changed the weight distribution, altered the stress points, affected how and when the structure would fail. Ethan had done emergency tree work before, but never in conditions like this, never with this much at stake. He cut away a supporting branch on the north side, trying to encourage the tree to fall toward the open yard instead of toward the buildings. The trunk shifted, groaned, but held. He moved to the next target, working as fast as he dared, knowing that every second he spent under this dying oak was a second closer to it falling on top of him. Emergency vehicles arrived. Fire trucks, police, power company crews. Someone was shouting at him through a megaphone, ordering him away from the tree. He ignored them and kept cutting. One more branch, Just one more to shift the balance. The chainsaw bit into wood. The branch began to separate. And then everything happened at once. The wind gusted with hurricane force. The trunk twisted. The final supporting structure gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Ethan threw himself backward as the oak came down. It fell exactly where he'd intended, away from his garage, away from Vivian's house, into the open space of her backyard. Branches crashed around him, and something struck his shoulder hard enough to knock him flat. But he was alive and the buildings were safe. He lay in the mud and rain, gasping, his shoulder screaming in pain, while emergency workers ran toward him. Someone was checking his vitals. Someone else was asking if he could move. The world had gone fuzzy at the edges, shock and adrenaline making everything seem distant and surreal. Then Vivian was there, kneeling beside him in the mud, her hands on his face, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You idiot! You complete idiot! What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about my garage." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, thin and thready. "Did it work? Is the garage okay?" "The garage is fine. The tree missed it by 10 feet. She was crying, he realized, tears mixing with rain on her face. "But you could have died. That tree could have killed you." But it didn't. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his shoulder. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt and probably in shock and definitely the most reckless person I've ever met." A paramedic gently moved Vivian aside and began examining Ethan's shoulder. "Looks like you took a pretty good hit. We need to get you checked out at the hospital." I don't need a hospital. Just help me up." "Sir, you could have internal injuries. You need proper evaluation." The argument continued while firefighters secured the scene and power company workers dealt with the downed lines. Eleanor Whitmore arrived at some point, surveying the destruction with her clipboard, already documenting new violations. Ethan saw Vivian turn on her with a fury that made even Eleanor take a step back. "Don't you dare," Vivian said, her voice carrying over the storm. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. You knew about this tree. Ethan told you it was dangerous. You saw it leaning toward his property, and you did nothing because the previous owners couldn't afford to remove it. This disaster is on you." "Ms. Hayes, I understand you're upset, but property maintenance is the owner's responsibility. He almost died saving his garage from a tree. You should have forced the previous owners to remove years ago. If you try to fine me for this, if you try to turn this into another violation, I will bury you in lawsuits." Vivian stepped closer, and something in her expression made Eleanor actually back up. "I've got lawyers on retainer who would love to take on a case of HOA misconduct and selective enforcement. They'd work pro bono just for the publicity. So go ahead, write me up. I'm done being afraid of you." Eleanor looked from Vivian to the fallen tree to Ethan being helped to his feet by paramedics. Whatever she saw in that tableau made her think better of pushing further. She made a note on her clipboard and retreated to her car without another word. Ethan let the paramedics load him into an ambulance, too exhausted to argue anymore. As they pulled away, he saw Vivian standing in the rain, watching him go. Her expression a mix of anger and fear and something else he couldn't quite name. The hospital confirmed what he already knew: a badly bruised shoulder, some minor cuts and scrapes, but nothing serious. They wanted to keep him for observation given the possibility of delayed shock, but he refused. He had a daughter at home and a business that wouldn't run itself. Mrs. Chen brought Mia to the hospital, and his daughter's tear-streaked face when she saw him made his chest tight. "Daddy, you got hurt." "I'm okay, Princess. Just a few bruises." "Mrs. Chen said you were being a hero, that you saved our house from the tree." "I was being careful. That's different from being a hero." But Mia wrapped her arms around him, gently, aware of his injuries, and whispered, "You're always my hero." Mrs. Chen drove them home around midnight. The storm had passed, leaving the neighborhood drenched and littered with debris. Emergency crews were still working on Vivian's property, removing the downed tree, repairing the power lines. Portable lights illuminated the destruction, turning the scene into something from a disaster movie. Vivian was waiting on Ethan's porch. She stood when she saw them, and Ethan could see that she'd changed clothes but was still wet from the earlier rain. She'd been waiting out here for hours. "Is he okay?" she asked Mrs. Chen. "Bruised and stubborn, the usual." Mrs. Chen helped Mia out of the car. "Come on, little one. Let's get you to bed while your father talks to the nice lady who's been worried sick about him." After they went inside, Ethan and Vivian stood on the porch in silence. The emergency lights cast strange shadows across her face, and he could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. "You shouldn't have done that," she said finally. "Cutting that tree in the storm. It was reckless and dangerous and necessary. You could have died. But I didn't, and my garage is safe, and your property is safe. It worked out." This time, she moved closer, and in the strange light, her eyes were dark and intense. "What if it hadn't? What if that tree had fallen on you? What was I supposed to tell Mia? It didn't fall on me, but it could have. And you knew that. You knew the risk, and you did it anyway." Her voice broke. "Why? Why would you risk your life like that?" Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, her problems had become his problems. Because watching her fight alone had become intolerable. Because when he saw that tree threatening both their homes, his first thought had been protecting her, not calculating odds or maintaining boundaries. Because he'd let her in, past every wall he'd built, and there was no going back from that. "I couldn't let it fall on the garage," he said instead. "Everything I've built, everything I have, it's in that building. If I'd lost it, I'd lose my business. I'd lose my ability to provide for Mia. I'd lose everything. So you risked your life to save your business. I risked my life to save my future." He met her eyes. "And maybe yours too." Vivian stared at him for a long moment, and then she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, gently, aware of his injured shoulder, but firmly enough that he could feel her shaking. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for saving the house, for fighting with me, for not letting me face this alone." Ethan held her with his good arm, breathing in the scent of rain and fear and something warmer, and admitted to himself what he'd been denying for days. He was in trouble. The kind of trouble that had nothing to do with HOA violations and everything to do with the woman in his arms who'd somehow become essential in the span of 2 weeks. They stood there while the emergency crews packed up their equipment and the neighborhood slowly returned to sleep. And neither of them mentioned the hearing that was still scheduled, the fines that were still accumulating, or the war with Eleanor Whitmore that was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Tonight, they'd survive the storm together. That was enough. When Ethan woke Monday morning, his shoulder reminded him exactly how stupid he'd been. The pain was sharp and insistent, radiating down his arm with every movement. He'd refused the prescription painkillers at the hospital. He needed to stay sharp for work, and now he was paying for that decision. Mia was already awake, sitting at the foot of his bed with worried eyes. "Does it hurt bad?" "It's manageable." He sat up slowly, testing his range of motion. "Limited, but functional. I've had worse." "Mrs. Chen says you should rest today." "Mrs. Chen worries too much." He stood, ignoring the protest from his shoulder. "I've got jobs to finish, Princess. The Martinez crew needs direction on the hardscape, and I need to check on the storm damage around the neighborhood. People are going to need cleanup work." "The new lady is outside." Ethan moved to the window. Vivian was in her backyard, surveying the destruction left by the fallen oak. The massive trunk lay across her yard like a felled giant, branches reaching in every direction. The fence between their properties was completely destroyed. Her driveway was still blocked by the limb that had taken down the power lines, though the lines themselves had been repaired overnight. She looked small, standing there among the wreckage, and something in Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. His phone rang. Eleanor Whitmore, because of course it was. "Ethan, I trust you're recovering well from last night's incident." "I'm fine, Mrs. Whitmore. Well, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to inform you that I'll be documenting the property damage at Ms. Hayes' residence for our insurance assessors. The fallen tree has created several additional violations: the destroyed fence, the blocked driveway, the debris covering the yard. She'll need to address these within the standard 48-hour window." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "You're going to fine her for storm damage? Damage caused by a tree you knew was dangerous. The tree was her responsibility as property owner. The fact that it fell during a storm doesn't absolve her of maintenance obligations." Eleanor's voice was crisp, professional, utterly unyielding. "However, I'm willing to be reasonable. If she can demonstrate that she's made arrangements for proper cleanup and repairs by end of business today, I'll waive the initial violation notice." "How generous of you." "I'm simply following established procedures, Ethan, as I'm sure you understand." A pause. I also wanted to mention that several neighbors witnessed your rather dramatic tree removal attempt last night. While I appreciate your concern for your property, operating a chainsaw during a severe storm without proper permits or safety protocols could constitute reckless endangerment. I'd hate for that to become part of the official record. There it was, the threat wrapped in concern, the reminder that Eleanor held all the power and wasn't afraid to use it. Noted, Ethan said flatly, and ended the call. He found Vivian still standing in her backyard, now holding what looked like a tablet and taking photos of the damage. She turned when she heard him approach, and her expression shifted from professional assessment to immediate concern. "You should be resting. That shoulder is fine. I've worked through worse." He gestured at the fallen oak. "Eleanor just called. She's giving you until end of business today to arrange cleanup, or she'll start issuing violations." "Of course she is." Vivian lowered the tablet. "I've already contacted 3 tree removal services. The earliest anyone can get here is Wednesday, and that's if I pay premium emergency rates." "I can handle the cleanup. I've got the equipment, the crew, the expertise." "Ethan, you can barely move your arm. You're not operating a chainsaw with that shoulder." "I'll supervise. Jenny and Tommy can do the heavy work." He was already calculating logistics, planning the sequence of cuts needed to safely section the trunk. "We can have this cleared by tomorrow evening if we start today." "Why would you do that? After everything Eleanor's already put you through, why would you risk giving her more ammunition?" "Because if I don't, you'll get fined, and because this is my fault." He looked at the massive oak, at the destruction it had caused. "I should have pushed harder to get this tree removed weeks ago. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it was going to fall. I just didn't think it would happen this fast." "This isn't your fault. This is nature and bad luck and Eleanor Whitmore's vindictive enforcement." Vivian moved closer, studying his face. "You saved my house last night. You saved your garage. You did everything you possibly could have done. I put myself at risk doing something reckless, and I got lucky." The reality of what could have happened was settling on him now, in the daylight, with his daughter safe inside and the emergency over. "That tree could have killed me, and if it had, Mia would be alone. But it didn't kill you. This time." He met her eyes. "But I can't keep doing this. Can't keep fighting battles that might end with me in a hospital or worse. I've got responsibilities, people depending on me." Vivian was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Are you saying you want to end our arrangement? That you want to stop helping me?" The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than the simple words conveyed, because they both knew the arrangement had stopped being about yard work and marketing weeks ago. It had become something else, something neither of them had planned for or knew how to name. "I'm saying I need to be smarter about this, strategic instead of reactive." Ethan turned toward the house. "The hearing is in 10 days. We focus on building a solid defense, presenting our case properly, and letting the system work instead of me playing hero with a chainsaw in a storm. The system is rigged. Eleanor owns that board. Then we change the board. Or we go over their heads. Or we find a legal angle they can't dismiss." He faced her again. "But we do it the right way. No more grand gestures, no more risks that could backfire." He could see the disappointment in her eyes, the understanding that he was pulling back, rebuilding the walls he'd let crumble over the past 2 weeks. But she just nodded and said, "Okay, we'll do it your way." The day that followed felt like moving through water. Ethan directed his crew from the ground, his shoulder making it impossible to do the physical work himself. Jenny and Tommy handled the tree removal with professional efficiency, cutting the trunk into manageable sections and hauling away the debris. By evening, Vivian's yard was clear except for the massive stump that would need specialized equipment to remove. Neighbors came by throughout the day, drawn by curiosity about the storm damage and the dramatic tree removal. Mrs. Chen brought food. Tom Rodriguez offered to help repair the fence. Even people who normally avoided any conflict with the HOA expressed quiet support for Vivian's situation. But what surprised Ethan most was the number of people who pulled him aside to tell him about their own experiences with Eleanor Whitmore. The arbitrary fines, the selective enforcement, the way she wielded HOA rules like weapons against anyone who challenged her authority. By the time the work was finished and his crew had packed up, Ethan had added 6 more names to their list of potential witnesses for the hearing. Not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to make Eleanor's position significantly less secure. Vivian made dinner for all of them: Ethan, Jenny, Tommy, and Mia. It was simple food, pasta, and salad, but there was something profound about sitting around her kitchen table together, sharing a meal after a long day of hard work. It felt like family in a way Ethan hadn't experienced in years. After Jenny and Tommy left, after Mia had been sent home to get ready for bed, Ethan found himself lingering on Vivian's porch. The evening was cool and clear, the storm-washed air carrying the scent of cut wood and fresh earth. "Thank you for dinner," he said, "and for feeding my crew. You didn't have to do that. They worked all day cleaning up my disaster. Feeding them was the least I could do." Vivian leaned against the porch railing, looking out at her transformed yard. "It's strange. 2 weeks ago, this place was a nightmare. Now it actually looks like someone lives here. You do live here." "Do I? Or am I just hiding here, waiting for the next disaster?" She turned to face him. "I keep thinking about what you said this morning, about being smart instead of reactive, about letting the system work. You're right, of course. But part of me wonders if the smart thing is just to leave. Sell this house, disappear somewhere else, start over again. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want anymore." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm evening. "I came here looking for peace and anonymity. Instead, I found HOA violations and storm damage and a neighbor who keeps risking himself to help me. It's not exactly the quiet life I was planning. Life rarely works out the way we plan." "No, it doesn't?" She studied him in the fading light. "Can I ask you something, and will you give me an honest answer?" "Depends on the question." "Why did you really cut down that tree last night? The truth, not the safe answer about protecting your garage." Ethan could deflect again, could retreat behind practical justifications, but he was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of maintaining walls that had already crumbled. "Because watching that tree threaten your house felt like watching everything I care about hang in the balance," he said quietly. "Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, you stopped being just a neighbor and became something I can't afford to lose. And because when I saw that oak falling, my first thought wasn't about my garage or my equipment. It was about making sure you were safe." Vivian's breath caught. "Ethan, I know it's complicated. I know I've got a daughter and a business and about 1,000 reasons why getting involved with you is a terrible idea. But apparently terrible ideas are my specialty lately." He moved closer. "So if you're planning to leave, to disappear again, I need to know now, before I make this worse for both of us." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes, fear and hope, caution and desire, all the same conflicts he was fighting. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was careful at first, tentative, both of them aware of his injured shoulder and the fragility of what they were beginning. But the gentleness quickly gave way to something deeper, more urgent. Two wounded people finding temporary shelter in each other, finding proof that they were still alive and still capable of connection despite everything that had tried to break them. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I'm not leaving. Not yet. Not until we see this through." "The hearing?" "Everything. The hearing, the HOA, whatever comes next." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting people like Eleanor and David control my life through fear. So we fight, together, and we see where that takes us." Ethan kissed her again, softer this time, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 years begin to thaw. They stood there until the last light faded from the sky, until Mrs. Chen's porch light flicked on next door as a pointed reminder that his daughter was waiting, until the practical realities of their lives reasserted themselves over the moment. "I should go," Ethan said, not moving. "You should." Vivian didn't let go of his hand. "Tomorrow's going to be busy. I need to prep for the hearing, line up witnesses, review all our documentation. I'll help. We'll work on it together." Together. He liked the sound of that word, the weight of it. "Okay?" He made it halfway across the yard before she called after him. "Ethan, what we just did, it doesn't change the defense strategy. We're still neighbors helping neighbors. Nothing more, at least not officially. I know. Because if Eleanor got wind that they were romantically involved, she'd use it to argue that their business arrangement was actually a cover for an inappropriate relationship, that Vivian was providing services in exchange for something other than legitimate trade." Just making sure we're on the same page. We are, he smiled. But for the record, I'm glad we're on the complicated page instead of the simple one. The next week blurred into a focused intensity unlike anything Ethan had experienced since the early days of building his business. Days were spent working his regular jobs while collecting evidence for the hearing. Evenings were spent with Vivian organizing testimonials, preparing their defense, and strategizing their approach. The witness list grew to 12 people willing to testify about Eleanor's selective enforcement. Tom Rodriguez provided documentation showing that Eleanor had ignored the same tree hazard on other properties while singling out Vivian's oak. Mrs. Chen brought HOA meeting minutes that revealed a pattern of personal vendettas disguised as policy enforcement. Meanwhile, Vivian's marketing work for Cole Landscaping was already showing results. Ethan's website was getting steady traffic. His social media following had grown from 0 to 500 in less than 2 weeks. And most importantly, his phone was ringing with new inquiries, legitimate leads from people who'd found him online and were interested in his services. He'd landed 3 new contracts by Wednesday, including a major commercial property that would bring in steady monthly revenue. The medical plaza that had dropped him was already regretting their decision. The new company they'd hired had destroyed 2 flower beds and left debris all over the parking lot. Your website traffic is up 40% from last week, Vivian said Thursday evening, showing him the analytics dashboard on her laptop. They were working at his kitchen table while Mia did homework at the other end. And your conversion rate is holding steady at 6%, which is excellent for a service business. I don't know what any of that means. It means people are finding you, and they're hiring you. It means the work I'm doing is actually working. She smiled, and Ethan saw genuine pride in her expression. This is what I loved about building my company, seeing concrete results from strategic effort. You miss it, the company you sold. Sometimes, but I don't miss the fighting, the constant battles over direction and control. She closed the laptop. And I don't miss David. I don't miss being afraid every time my phone rang or someone knocked on my door. Has he contacted you since you've been here? No. Either he hasn't found me or he's waiting for the right moment to make an appearance. She glanced at Mia, who was absorbed in her math worksheet. Part of me hopes he never finds me. Part of me wants him to show up just so I can prove to myself that I'm not afraid anymore. Friday brought a development that changed everything. Ethan was at a job site when he got a call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Cole? This is James Patterson. I'm an attorney representing a group of homeowners in your neighborhood who are concerned about HOA governance issues. Ethan's pulse quickened. What kind of concerns? Let's just say Mrs. Whitmore's enforcement patterns have attracted attention from some influential people. I understand you and your neighbor, Ms. Hayes, have a hearing scheduled for next Thursday regarding alleged business violations. That's right. My clients would like to attend that hearing, not as witnesses, but as interested parties with standing to observe HOA proceedings. Patterson's voice was smooth, professional, and carried an undertone of steel. We believe Mrs. Whitmore's actions in your case may constitute a pattern of harassment that violates state HOA regulations. If the hearing goes the way we expect, we're prepared to file a formal complaint with the state regulatory board. Who are your clients? I'm not at liberty to say, but they're homeowners who've been affected by similar selective enforcement and are tired of living under what amounts to a dictatorship. A pause. Do we have your permission to attend the hearing? It's a public meeting. You don't need my permission. Perhaps not legally, but I prefer to extend professional courtesy. Patterson cleared his throat. I should mention that if this goes to formal proceedings against Mrs. Whitmore, you and Ms. Hayes would likely be called as witnesses. That could mean depositions, potentially a lawsuit. Are you prepared for that level of involvement? Ethan thought about Mia, about his business, about everything he'd fought to build and protect. Then he thought about Vivian standing in her destroyed yard, about the fear in her eyes when Eleanor delivered that first violation notice, about every other person in this neighborhood who'd been crushed under Eleanor's arbitrary enforcement. I'm prepared, he said. When he told Vivian about the call that evening, she listened in silence, her expression unreadable. This could get ugly, she said finally. If this attorney is planning to go after Eleanor legally, she's going to retaliate. She's going to make our lives hell in every way she can. She's already doing that. This would be worse. This would be personal. Vivian stood and paced to the window. But it might also be our best shot at actually stopping her. Not just defending ourselves, but creating real consequences for her behavior. You don't sound sure. I'm not. She turned to face him. I came here to hide, remember? To avoid conflict and live quietly. Jumping into a legal battle with the HOA president is the opposite of that plan. So what do you want to do? I want to finish what we started. The uncertainty left her face, replaced by determination. I want to stand up at that hearing and tell the truth. I want to watch Eleanor realize she can't intimidate us anymore. And I want to help make sure she can't do this to anyone else. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. Thursday in the community center. Ethan and Vivian arrived early, carrying boxes of documentation, printed testimonials, and carefully organized evidence. The room was set up like a small courtroom, with a raised table for the board at the front and rows of chairs for attendees. Eleanor was already there, along with 4 other board members. She watched Ethan and Vivian set up their materials with an expression of barely concealed contempt. People started arriving around 6:45. Mrs. Chen, Tom Rodriguez, the Patels, the Kramers, all their witnesses, looking nervous but determined. Then more people showed up, neighbors Ethan barely knew, filling the seats until the room was standing room only. At 6:50, a man in an expensive suit entered with 2 associates. He didn't introduce himself, just took a seat in the front row and opened a leather portfolio. James Patterson, almost certainly, and his presence had not gone unnoticed by Eleanor, whose expression had shifted from contempt to something approaching alarm. At exactly 7 o'clock, Eleanor called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to address violations filed against Mrs. Vivian Hayes regarding unauthorized commercial activity conducted from her residential property. Eleanor's voice was crisp, authoritative. Ms. Hayes, you and your representative may present your defense. Ethan stood, his prepared statement in hand, but before he could speak, Patterson stood as well. Madam President, before we proceed, I'd like to enter a formal objection to these proceedings on behalf of several homeowners who believe this case represents a pattern of selective and retaliatory enforcement. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Mr. Patterson, you don't have standing in this matter. I have standing as an attorney representing homeowners in this association, and I'm exercising our right to observe and document these proceedings for potential regulatory action. He sat down, having made his point. The room was completely silent. Eleanor looked at her fellow board members, clearly rattled, then back at Patterson. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its authority. Very well, Mr. Cole, you may present your defense. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. 2 weeks ago, I made an agreement with my neighbor. She needed help with yard work she didn't know how to do. I needed help with marketing I didn't know how to do. We agreed to trade services, a straightforward neighbor-to-neighbor arrangement that happens thousands of times every day across this country. He pulled out their contract, holding it up for the board to see. We documented our agreement because we both believe in doing things properly. But that documentation is being used against us as evidence of commercial activity. The logic seems to be that if we'd done this informally, with a handshake and a verbal agreement, it would be fine. But because we put it in writing, because we took it seriously, we're suddenly running an illegal business. He set down the contract and pulled out the stack of testimonials. Over the past 2 weeks, I've talked to dozens of people in this neighborhood. People who've helped their neighbors with babysitting, pet care, home repairs, computer work, all in exchange for similar help. None of them documented their arrangements. None of them have been fined or investigated. The only difference between their situations and ours is that Mrs. Whitmore decided to target us. Eleanor tried to interrupt, but Ethan kept going. I've also learned some interesting things about the oak tree that fell on Ms. Hayes' property during last week's storm. That tree was documented as a hazard in HOA meeting minutes from 3 years ago. The previous owners were never required to remove it because they claimed financial hardship. But when Ms. Hayes bought the property, suddenly that tree became an emergency requiring immediate removal at her expense. He pulled out Tom Rodriguez's documentation showing similar hazards on other properties that Eleanor had ignored. This isn't about enforcing rules fairly. This is about Mrs. Whitmore using her position to punish a new resident who didn't immediately conform to her expectations. It's abuse of power, plain and simple. The room erupted. People started standing, calling out their own stories of selective enforcement. Mrs. Chen detailed how Eleanor had fined her for garden decorations that other houses displayed without consequence. Tom Rodriguez described his fence dispute that had cost him thousands in legal fees. One by one, the witnesses they'd prepared stood and spoke, each testimony adding to the damning portrait of Eleanor's governance. Eleanor tried to restore order, pounding her gavel, but the room had turned against her. Even the other board members were exchanging uncomfortable looks, clearly aware that Patterson was documenting everything. Finally, Vivian stood. The room quieted, curious about what the woman at the center of the storm had to say. "I moved here looking for peace," Vivian said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I'd just ended a difficult business relationship and wanted somewhere quiet to rebuild my life. I bought a house that needed work, and I was willing to do that work. But from day one, I was treated like a problem to be solved rather than a neighbor to be welcomed." She looked directly at Eleanor. "I don't know what I did to make you decide I was a threat. Maybe it was my car, or my clothes, or just the fact that I'm new and you don't like change. But instead of introducing yourself as a neighbor, you introduced yourself with a violation notice. And when I tried to address those violations, when I accepted help from the man next door who'd lived through your enforcement before, you turned that help into a weapon against both of us." Vivian's voice strengthened. "I'm not leaving. I'm not paying your fines. And I'm not accepting your authority to dictate how neighbors help each other. You've spent years building a culture of fear in this neighborhood, making people afraid to plant the wrong flowers or paint their shutters the wrong color. That ends tonight." The applause started slowly, then built until the entire room was standing. Ethan watched Eleanor's face cycle through shock, rage, and finally something that might have been fear as she realized she'd lost control not just of the hearing, but of the entire board. Patterson stood and addressed the room. "I'm formally notifying this board that a complaint will be filed with the state HOA Regulatory Commission regarding tonight's proceedings and the documented pattern of selective enforcement. All homeowners present who've experienced similar issues should contact my office. We're building a comprehensive case." Eleanor slammed her gavel one final time. "This hearing is adjourned. The board will review all testimony and issue a decision within 30 days. But everyone in that room knew the decision had already been made. Eleanor Whitmore's reign was over. As people filed out, dozens of them stopped to shake Ethan's and Vivian's hands, to thank them for standing up, to share contact information for Patterson's investigation. The energy in the room had shifted from fear to hope, from resignation to possibility. Mrs. Chen hugged Vivian with tears in her eyes. 20 years I've lived here. 20 years of being afraid to hang wind chimes or plant roses in the wrong spot. You gave us our neighborhood back." When the room finally cleared, Ethan and Vivian stood alone among the scattered chairs and forgotten programs. They were exhausted, wrung out, but also exhilarated in a way that made Ethan feel more alive than he had in years. "We did it," Vivian said, a smile breaking across her face. "We actually did it." "You did it. That speech at the end, that's what turned the room." "We did it together." She took his hand, like everything else these past 2 weeks. Ethan pulled her close, mindful of his still healing shoulder, and kissed her in the empty community center. It tasted like victory and relief, and the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Outside, the neighborhood waited in the summer darkness, transformed by the events of one evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts, the slow work of rebuilding a community that had been fractured by years of authoritarian control. But tonight, standing in that empty room with the woman who'd accidentally become essential to his life, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking after all. They drove home in Ethan's truck, the silence between them comfortable and charged with equal measure. Vivian kept her hand on his knee, a casual touch that felt monumental after weeks of careful distance. Through the windshield, the neighborhood looked different somehow, softer, less threatening, like a place that might actually become home instead of a battleground. "Do you think she'll resign?" Vivian asked as they pulled into his driveway. "Eleanor? No, she'll fight this to the bitter end." Oh, Ethan killed the engine but didn't move to get out. But she's lost her power. That's what matters. Once people stop being afraid of her, she's just another neighbor with opinions nobody has to listen to. Patterson seemed confident about the state investigation. Patterson knows what he's doing. I looked him up after he called. He's handled 3 other HOA cases in the past 5 years, all of them successful. Eleanor's about to learn what it's like to be on the receiving end of someone else's rules. Vivian was quiet for a moment, then said, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong, for this to turn out to be too good to be true. It's not over yet. We've still got 30 days before the board issues their decision. Still got the state investigation, still got whatever retaliation Eleanor dreams up in the meantime. You're really good at the pep talks. I'm being realistic. He turned to face her. But realistic doesn't mean pessimistic. We won tonight. We showed up, told the truth, and people listened. That's worth celebrating, even if more battles are coming. She leaned over and kissed him, slow and sweet, and Ethan felt the last of his carefully maintained walls crumble into dust. Stay, he said when they broke apart. Just for a while. Have coffee, help me decompress, let me convince myself this actually happened. Mrs. Chen is probably watching us through her curtains right now. Mrs. Chen has been trying to set me up with every single woman in a 5-mile radius for 3 years. She's going to be insufferable about this. Vivian laughed, and the sound made something warm bloom in Ethan's chest. Okay, coffee, but just for a while. I don't want to confuse Mia. They found Mia asleep on the couch, Mrs. Chen reading beside her with a knowing smile that confirmed Vivian's suspicion about the curtain watching. So? Mrs. Chen asked, closing her book. How did it go? We won. Ethan scooped up his daughter carefully, and she stirred but didn't wake. Or at least we didn't lose. The board's going to review everything and issue a decision in 30 days. And Eleanor looked like she'd swallowed a wasp, Vivian added. That was the best part. Mrs. Chen stood and gathered her things. About time someone stood up to that woman. She's been a tyrant for too long. She paused at the door, looking between Ethan and Vivian with an expression that was pure satisfaction. You two make a good team, just saying. After she left, after Ethan carried Mia upstairs and tucked her into bed, he found Vivian in his kitchen making coffee with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been there before, which she had multiple times over the past 2 weeks. But something about seeing her there now felt different, more permanent, more real. Your kitchen is better organized than mine, she said, finding mugs without having to search. Everything has a place. Occupational hazard. I spend my days creating order out of chaos. It bleeds into home life. I like it. It's calming. She handed him a mug and leaned against the counter. My apartment in the city was always cluttered. Papers everywhere, takeout containers, constant chaos. David used to say it reflected my scattered thinking. David was an idiot. David was a lot of things, but he wasn't an idiot. That's what made him dangerous. She took a sip of coffee. He knew exactly how to undermine me, how to make me question myself, how to make his control feel like concern. Has he tried to contact you since you've been here? No, which either means he hasn't found me or he's planning something. She met Ethan's eyes. I keep expecting him to show up at the worst possible moment. It's what he'd do. Wait until I felt safe, then remind me that I'll never really be free of him. If he shows up, we call the police. We document everything. We make sure he understands that he's not welcome. We. Vivian smiled slightly. I like how you keep saying that. We're a team, apparently. Mrs. Chen said so, which makes it official. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, the events of the evening slowly settling into memory. Through the window, Ethan could see Vivian's house, the porch light she'd left on casting warm illumination across her repaired yard. 4 weeks ago, that house had been a disaster. Now it looked lived in, loved, like a home instead of a hiding place. I should go, Vivian said, but she didn't move. Let you get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be crazy. Word about tonight is going to spread, and we're both going to field a lot of questions. Probably. Ethan set down his mug. But before you go, I need to ask you something. That sounds ominous. What happens after? After the board makes their decision, after the state investigation wraps up, after Eleanor's power is broken, and the neighborhood settles down? He moved closer. Do you stay? Or was this house always just temporary? A place to hide until you figured out your next move? Vivian looked at him for a long moment. And he could see her weighing the question, considering futures she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. A month ago, I would have said temporary. I would have kept my bags half-packed mentally, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. She set down her own mug and closed the distance between them. But that was before I met a stubborn contractor who kept helping me even when it made his life harder. Before I remembered what it felt like to build something meaningful instead of just maintaining what already exists. Before I found reasons to stay that have nothing to do with hiding. Those sound like good reasons. They are. Scary, but good. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. So to answer your question, I'm staying. Not because I'm hiding, but because I'm choosing to. There's a difference. Ethan kissed her, and this time there was no urgency, no fear of being interrupted, just two people acknowledging what had been building between them since that first morning when she'd murdered a lawnmower and he'd made the mistake of caring. When she finally left, walking across the driveway to her own house, Ethan stood at his window and watched her lights come on one by one. And for the first time in 3 years, the future felt like something to anticipate instead of something to survive. The next morning brought the consequences Mrs. Chen had predicted. Ethan's phone started ringing before 7 a.m., neighbors wanting to know what happened at the hearing, reporters from the local paper asking about the HOA controversy, and 3 new potential clients who'd heard about his landscaping business through the neighborhood grapevine. By the time he got Mia fed and off to school, he'd fielded a dozen calls and scheduled 2 estimates for the following week. His email inbox was similarly flooded, including a message from the Medical Plaza Management Company asking if he'd be willing to reconsider their maintenance contract at a higher rate. Sounds like business is booming, Jenny said when he arrived at their current job site. My phone's been going crazy too. Everyone wants to know about the hearing. Oh, just tell people the truth. We presented our case, the board is reviewing it, and we're waiting for their decision. And the part where you and Vivian are together? What do I tell people about that? Ethan looked at his crew leader sharply. How did you... Boss, everyone knows. Mrs. Chen told Mrs. Rodriguez, who told half the neighborhood. Plus Tommy saw you 2 kissing in your truck last night. Jenny grinned. For what it's worth, I think it's great. You've been alone too long. We're not. It's complicated. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. She likes you. You like her. You're both adults. Seems pretty simple to me. But simple was the last thing it felt like when Ethan got a call from James Patterson that afternoon. Mr. Cole, I wanted to update you on the state investigation. I filed the formal complaint with the Regulatory Commission, and they've agreed to fast-track the review given the severity of the allegations. Patterson's voice was brisk, professional. However, I need to warn you that Mrs. Whitmore has hired her own attorney. They're claiming that you and Ms. Hayes orchestrated this entire situation to discredit the HOA and avoid legitimate violations. Ethan's grip tightened on his phone. That's insane. That's their defense strategy. They're going to argue that you deliberately created a business arrangement that violated HOA rules, then manufactured a controversy when you got caught. They'll claim Ms. Hayes is operating a consulting business from her home, and that your relationship is proof of improper benefits exchanged. Our relationship has nothing to do with our business arrangement. I believe you. But perception matters in these cases. The fact that you're now romantically involved gives their argument some surface credibility. Patterson paused. I need to know how you want to handle this. We can stick with our current strategy and weather their counterattack, or we can get ahead of it by being transparent about the timeline of your relationship. What do you recommend? Transparency. If we try to hide the relationship, they'll use it to suggest you were hiding it because it proves their case. If we acknowledge it openly and explain that it developed after your initial agreement, we neutralize their argument. Ethan closed his eyes, thinking about Vivian, about Mia, about the careful life he'd built that was now being dissected by lawyers and HOA boards. I need to talk to Vivian about this. Of course, but I need an answer by Monday. The Regulatory Commission wants depositions next week, and I need to know what position we're taking. He found Vivian in her backyard, photographing the new flowers she'd planted where the oak tree had once stood. She looked up when he approached, her smile fading when she saw his expression. What happened? He told her about Patterson's call, about Eleanor's counterattack, about the choice they faced. She listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively more pale. So our options are to hide our relationship and look guilty, or admit it and let them twist it into evidence of corruption, she said flatly. Perfect. Patterson thinks transparency is the better play. Patterson isn't the one whose personal life is going to be picked apart by lawyers. She set down her camera. I came here to escape this exact situation. People using my relationships as weapons, turning private choices into public ammunition, and now I'm right back in it. This is different. This is us choosing to be honest instead of letting someone else control the narrative. Is it? Or is it just a different version of the same trap? She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. David used to do this, use my transparency against me. I'd tell him the truth about something, and he'd find a way to make it sound like manipulation or deception. I learned to keep everything private, to never give him ammunition. I'm not David, and Eleanor isn't either as much as she'd like to be. Ethan moved closer but didn't touch her, sensing she needed space. We tell the truth about when our relationship started. We provide evidence, text messages, emails, witness statements from people who saw us before and after. We make it impossible for them to twist the timeline. And if they do it anyway, if they convince people that we're exactly what Eleanor says we are, then we fight harder, we appeal, we keep telling the truth until someone listens. He waited until she turned to face him. But I won't do any of that without you. If you want to walk away from this, from the investigation, from us, if that's what you need to feel safe, I'll understand. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through fear and anger and something that might have been hope. I don't want to walk away, she said finally. I don't want to run anymore. I need to know that when this gets ugly, because it will get ugly, you're not going to regret dragging me into your life. That you're not going to look at Mia and wish you'd kept your distance from the complicated woman next door. The only thing I regret is not meeting you sooner. Ethan closed the distance between them. Mia likes you. My business is thriving because of you. I'm happier than I've been in 3 years because of you. Whatever Eleanor throws at us, whatever David does if he shows up, whatever complications come, they're worth it. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, like she was trying to memorize the moment before it could be taken away. When they broke apart, she said, "Okay, we tell Patterson the truth. We give him everything he needs, and we stop letting other people's fear control our choices." They spent the weekend preparing their timeline, documenting their relationship's progression with embarrassing thoroughness. Text messages from the first week, purely professional. Photos from the yard workday. Ethan teaching Vivian how to properly stack branches, both of them muddy and laughing. The shift around the second week when their texts started including personal details, jokes, casual check-ins that had nothing to do with business. The first time they'd had dinner together alone was 10 days after they met. The first kiss was the night after the storm, witnessed by Mrs. Chen's very observant eyes. Everything documented, everything provable, everything showing a clear progression from neighbors to friends to something more. Patterson received the documentation Monday morning and called an hour later. "This is perfect. Better than I hoped. We can establish a clear timeline that shows your business arrangement preceded any romantic involvement." He paused. "Though I have to say, for two people who claim to have kept things professional, you were texting each other an awful lot." "We were friends," Ethan said. "Is that allowed?" "More than allowed. It actually strengthens our case. If you'd kept everything coldly professional, it would look calculated. This looks organic, real." Patterson's tone shifted. "The depositions are scheduled for Thursday. I'll prep you both Wednesday evening. Be honest, be clear, and don't let their attorney rattle you. They're going to try to make your relationship sound suspicious. Just stick to the facts." The depositions were held in Patterson's office, a sleek downtown building that made Ethan feel underdressed in his work clothes. Eleanor's attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Diane Rothman, spent 3 hours trying to poke holes in their story. "Mr. Cole, you expect us to believe that you spent an entire weekend doing intensive landscaping work for someone you just met purely out of neighborly concern? I expect you to believe what happened. Miss Hayes needed help. Her yard was a disaster, and the HOA was threatening fines. I had the skills to fix it. We made a trade. A trade that just happened to turn into a romantic relationship. A trade that led to a friendship that turned into a relationship. Yes. How convenient. How human, Patterson interjected. People work together. They get to know each other. Relationships develop. Unless you're suggesting there's something inherently suspicious about that? Rothman moved on, but the pattern continued. Every answer was picked apart, every detail questioned, every choice examined for hidden motives. By the time Ethan's deposition ended, he was exhausted and furious, and more certain than ever that they were doing the right thing. Vivian's deposition was worse. Rothman seemed to take particular pleasure in making her relive the decision to leave her old life, in questioning her motives for buying a house in this neighborhood, in suggesting that her entire story was a calculated setup to run a consulting business without proper licensing. You're a wealthy woman, Ms. Hayes. You could have bought a house anywhere. Why this particular property? Because it was available, affordable, and in a quiet neighborhood where I thought I could have some privacy. Privacy to operate a business without oversight. Privacy to heal from a difficult situation and start over. Yet within 2 weeks of moving in, you'd established a business relationship with your neighbor. I established a mutually beneficial agreement between neighbors. That's not a business. You provided professional marketing services in exchange for landscaping services. That's the definition of a business transaction. I helped a friend who needed help, and he helped me in return. That's the definition of community. The back and forth went on for hours. By the time both depositions were finished, they were both wrung out, but Patterson seemed satisfied. You both did well, stuck to your story, didn't get defensive, came across as credible. He packed up his files. Rothman's going to argue that the timeline is suspicious, that the relationship proves impropriety. But we've got documentation, we've got witnesses, and most importantly, we've got the truth on our side. When will the commission make a decision? Vivian asked. Could be weeks, could be months. These things move slowly. Patterson hesitated. In the meantime, be prepared for Eleanor to escalate. She's going to use every tool she has left to make your lives difficult. Document everything. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. And for the love of all that's holy, don't do anything that could be construed as retaliation. They left Patterson's office and drove home in silence, both processing the day's events. It was nearly dark when they pulled into the neighborhood, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on. A silver sedan was parked in front of Vivian's house. She went very still. That's David's car. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You're sure? I'm sure. He changed the license plate, but that's his car. Same model, same custom color. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. He found me. We call the police. And tell them what? That my ex-fiancé is parked on a public street? He hasn't done anything illegal. He's just sitting there making a point. The point being that he knows where you are. The point being that he'll always know where I am, that I can't hide from him. She reached for the door handle. I need to deal with this. Not alone. Ethan killed the engine. We deal with this together. They approached the car together, and Ethan got his first look at David Chen, mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of polished appearance that came from money and careful cultivation. He rolled down his window as they approached, his expression friendly, unthreatening. Vivian, you look well. What are you doing here, David? I was in the area, thought I'd check on you. Make sure you were settling in okay. His eyes shifted to Ethan. This must be the neighbor I've been hearing about. Ethan Cole, right? The landscaper who's been helping Vivian with her projects. You need to leave, Ethan said flatly. I'm parked on a public street. I'm not breaking any laws. David's smile widened. But I'm happy to leave after I speak with Vivian, privately. Just a few minutes to catch up. She doesn't want to catch up with you. Vivian can speak for herself. David looked at her. Can't you, Viv? Or have you let your new friend here take over making decisions for you already? Vivian's jaw tightened. I have nothing to say to you, David. We ended our business relationship. We ended our personal relationship. There's nothing left to discuss. I disagree. I think there's quite a bit to discuss. For instance, I've been following the news about your HOA troubles. Quite the controversy you've stirred up. Almost like you wanted attention, wanted to make a scene. I wanted to be left alone. And yet here you are, in the middle of a legal battle, making headlines in the local paper. That doesn't sound like someone who wants to be left alone. He leaned forward slightly. It sounds like someone who's playing games. And you know how I feel about games, Viv. Ethan stepped between them. She told you to leave. If you don't, I'm calling the police for harassment. Harassment requires a threat or unwanted contact. I'm simply having a conversation. David's expression hardened. But I can see I'm not welcome. I'll go. For now. He started his engine. Oh, and Vivian? That state investigation into your HOA? Very thorough. All sorts of details coming out about relationships and business arrangements. I'm sure everything will be fine. You've always been so good at explaining away complications. He drove off slowly, deliberately, making sure they watched him leave. Vivian stood frozen in the street, trembling. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders and she turned into him, her control finally cracking. He knows everything. The HOA investigation, our relationship, all of it. He's been watching, gathering information. Then we document this. We tell Patterson. We make sure there's a record that he showed up, that he made veiled threats. He didn't make threats. He's too smart for that. He just reminded me that he's watching, that he can make my life complicated whenever he wants. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. This is what he does. He doesn't attack directly. He just applies pressure in subtle ways until you break. You're not going to break, and you're not alone this time. Ethan took her hand. Come on. We're calling Patterson right now. Then we're calling the police and filing a report. Even if they can't do anything, we start the paper trail. Patterson took the news seriously. I'll include this in our filing with the Regulatory Commission. It establishes a pattern. Eleanor's harassment through official channels, your ex showing up at your home. It all paints a picture of coordinated intimidation. The police were less helpful. They took a report, documented David's presence, but confirmed what Vivian already knew. Parking on a public street and having a conversation wasn't a crime. They suggested she consider a restraining order if the contact continued, but cautioned that proving harassment was difficult. That night, Vivian stayed at Ethan's house. Not in his bed, neither of them was ready for that complication with Mia in the next room, but on the couch, where she could be close to people instead of alone with her fear. Ethan found her there at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Hey. He sat down on the coffee table facing her. You okay? I keep thinking about what David said, about me making a scene, wanting attention. What if he's right? What if I turned a simple violation into this whole production because I couldn't just accept the rules and move on? You fought back against unfair enforcement. That's not making a scene. That's standing up for yourself. Or it's me creating drama because I can't function without conflict. She sat up. David used to say that about me. That I needed crisis to feel alive. That I manufactured problems when things got too stable. David was manipulating you, making you doubt yourself so you'd be easier to control. Was he? Or was he seeing something real? She looked at Ethan. My whole life, I've bounced from one crisis to another. Problems with my family, problems in business school, problems with every relationship I've ever had. The only constant is me. The only constant is that you refuse to accept being treated badly. That's not creating drama. That's having standards. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know that you spent a weekend clearing rocks from a yard because you refused to give up. I know that you helped rebuild my business when you had no reason to. I know that you stood up in front of that board and told the truth, even though it was terrifying. He took her hand. I know enough. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, then said, what if David's right about the investigation? What if we end up making everything worse by fighting? Then we deal with it, together. He squeezed her hand. But I don't think we're making it worse. I think we're making it better. For us? For the neighborhood? For everyone who was too scared to fight back before. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of running. I just want this to be over. It will be. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually. And when it is, you'll still be here. We'll still be here. That's what matters. The weeks that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. The HOA board maintained radio silence, neither approving nor rejecting the violations against Vivian, but also not enforcing the fines. Eleanor had essentially gone into hiding, attending no board meetings and responding to no emails. The other board members seemed paralyzed, afraid to act without her direction, but also aware that the state investigation made any enforcement action risky. David didn't return, but his presence lingered. Vivian would get strange calls at odd hours. No one speaking, just breathing, then disconnecting. Items would be moved on her porch. Nothing stolen, just rearranged, proof that someone had been there. It was subtle, untraceable, and exactly the kind of psychological warfare David excelled at. They reported each incident, built the paper trail Patterson recommended, installed security cameras that caught nothing conclusive but made them both feel slightly safer, and slowly, gradually, the harassment decreased. Either David got bored or he realized the cameras made his games too risky. Ethan's business, meanwhile, was thriving. The new website Vivian had built was bringing in steady inquiries. His social media following had grown to over 2,000. He'd hired 2 new crew members to handle the increased workload, and for the first time in 3 years, Cole Landscaping was actually profitable instead of just surviving. On a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the hearing, Patterson called with news. The Regulatory Commission has issued their findings. They're ruling in your favor. Eleanor Whitmore has been found guilty of selective enforcement, abuse of authority, and harassment of homeowners. She's being removed from the board effective immediately and banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. And the violations against Vivian? Dismissed with prejudice. Not only are the fines nullified, but the commission has ordered the HOA to reimburse Ms. Hayes for legal expenses and issue a formal apology. They're actually going to apologize? It's part of the settlement. The HOA admits wrongdoing, pays restitution, and implements new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. It's a complete victory. After he hung up, Ethan walked next door and knocked. Vivian answered in paint-splattered clothes. She'd been working on her home office, transforming it from a temporary space into something permanent. "We won," he said simply. Her hand flew to her mouth. "The commission ruled? Eleanor's out. Violations dismissed. They even have to apologize and pay your legal fees." Vivian stared at him for a moment, then launched herself into his arms. He caught her easily, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "It's over. It's actually over. The HOA part is over. We still need to deal with David. I can handle David. Now that I'm not fighting on 2 fronts, now that I have solid ground under me again, I can handle one obsessive ex-fiancé." She pulled back to look at him. "We did it. We actually did it. You did it. You stood up when it mattered most. We did it together. Stop trying to give me all the credit." She kissed him, deep and thorough, right there in her doorway for the whole neighborhood to see. Mrs. Chen, walking past with her dog, called out, "About time you two stopped pretending to just be neighbors." The formal apology came 2 weeks later at a special HOA meeting. The new board president, Tom Rodriguez, elected in an emergency session, read the statement that had been drafted by the commission and the HOA's attorneys. It was thorough, explicit, and genuinely apologetic in a way that felt unprecedented. The neighborhood had turned out in force, packing the community center to witness the moment. When Tom finished reading and offered the floor to Vivian, the room went silent. She stood, elegant in a simple dress, no longer looking like someone who was hiding or afraid. "Thank you for the apology. I accept it, and I hope we can all move forward together in building a community based on fairness and mutual respect instead of fear and intimidation." She paused. "But I also want to say something to everyone here. When I moved to this neighborhood, I was running from a difficult situation. I wanted to hide, to be invisible, to avoid conflict at all costs. But this community taught me that hiding isn't the same as healing. Fighting back isn't the same as creating drama. And standing up for yourself doesn't make you difficult. It makes you strong." She looked at Ethan, who was standing near the back with Mia. "I found more than a home here. I found people worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life with. So thank you for that apology, but more importantly, thank you for showing me that some places, some people, are worth the risk of putting down roots." The applause was thunderous. After the meeting, neighbors lined up to shake their hands, to thank them for standing up to Eleanor, to welcome Vivian properly to the community. It felt like a celebration, like the neighborhood exhaling after years of holding its breath. Mia tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy, is Vivian going to stay now?" "I think so, Princess. Why?" "Because I like her." And because you smile more when she's around, said with the brutal honesty of a 7-year-old who saw everything and missed nothing. I like her too. Are you going to marry her? Whoa, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're just dating. Mrs. Chen says you're going to marry her. She made a bet with Mrs. Rodriguez. Ethan looked at Vivian, who was talking with Tom Rodriguez and hadn't heard the conversation. What do you think? Should I marry her? Mia considered this seriously. Does she make you happy? Yeah, she really does. Then yes, you should marry her, but not right away. I need time to get used to having her around more. Deal. He ruffled her hair. Give me at least a year? Okay, but then you have to ask her. Mrs. Chen says that's how it works. That night, after Mia was asleep, after the celebration had ended and the neighborhood had settled into quiet contentment, Ethan and Vivian sat on his back porch looking at the stars. Mia asked me today if I was going to marry you, Ethan said. Vivian turned to him sharply. What did you say? I said I needed at least a year to convince you to put up with me permanently. A year, huh? Seemed reasonable. Give you time to finish settling in, to make sure David's really gone, to figure out if this is actually what you want long term. I already know what I want long term. She took his hand. I want coffee waiting for me in the mornings. I want to help Mia with her homework. I want to watch you build things and create order out of chaos. I want to be part of your carefully structured life and make it slightly less structured. Slightly less structured sounds terrifying. It should. I'm a very disruptive influence. She smiled. But I'm also patient. If you need a year to be sure, I can wait a year. I don't need a year to be sure. I'm already sure. I just thought you might need time. I've spent enough time running from things. I'd rather spend time running toward them. She kissed him softly. But we can take it slow anyway. Make sure Mia's comfortable. Make sure your business is stable. Make sure we're building on solid ground instead of crisis adrenaline. Solid ground. I like that. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the neighborhood settle around them. Somewhere in the distance, someone was mowing their lawn despite it being evening, probably getting a jump on weekend chores. The sound that had first brought them together, now just part of the ambient noise of home. I need to tell you something, Vivian said quietly. David contacted my lawyer last week. He's dropping all claims to the company, signing papers that fully release him from any ongoing involvement. His lawyer said he's met someone new, that he's moving to Seattle, that he wants a clean break. Do you believe him? I want to. Whether I actually do is a different question. She leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. But either way, I'm done letting him control my life through fear. If he comes back, we deal with it. If he doesn't, even better. Either way, I'm staying. Good. Because I wasn't going to let you leave anyway. Possessive much? Practical. You promised to finish redesigning my website. I've got plans for an expansion that needs proper marketing support. So you want me for my marketing skills? Among other things. He kissed the top of her head. But yeah, the marketing skills are definitely a selling point. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that felt remarkably similar to the one where they'd met, Ethan woke to the sound of a lawnmower. But this time, it was running smoothly, rhythmically, the way a properly maintained mower should sound. He looked out the window to see Vivian in her yard, mowing in straight lines with the commercial-grade mower he'd taught her to use. She'd learned the proper technique, the importance of overlap, the rhythm of good lawn care. Her yard looked professional, maintained, loved. Mia appeared beside him, still in her pajamas. Vivian's mowing again. She is. She's gotten pretty good at it. She has. Are you going to help her? She doesn't need my help anymore. She's got this. But he went outside anyway, drawn by habit and something deeper. Vivian saw him coming and killed the engine. Morning, want to inspect my work? Just admiring the view. The lawn does look good, doesn't it? Nice edges, even height, no visible stripes. She grinned. I've learned from the best. You've definitely come a long way from the woman who murdered a mower on rocks. Hey, that mower was already dying. I just hastened its inevitable demise. She looked at her house, her yard, the life she'd built here. Seriously, though, thank you for everything, for helping when you didn't have to, for fighting beside me, for showing me what home could feel like. Thank you for showing me that taking risks isn't always reckless. Sometimes it's just necessary. She crossed the yard and kissed him, tasting like morning coffee and possibility. When they broke apart, Mrs. Chen was on her porch with a video camera, not even pretending to be subtle. "For the wedding video," she called out. "You'll thank me later." "We're not engaged yet, Mrs. Chen," Vivian called back. "Yet. See, she said yet. Tom, you owe me $20. Ethan laughed and pulled Vivian close. "This neighborhood is going to be insufferable about us." "Good. Let them be happy for us. We've earned some happiness." They stood there in the morning light, two people who'd found each other through crisis and chaos, who'd fought together and won together, who'd chosen each other not because it was easy, but because it was right. The disciplined single dad who'd spent years holding his life together alone had finally let someone in. The billionaire who'd seemed like chaos in heels had become the woman who gave his home a heartbeat again. What began as irritation across a fence ended with two wounded people choosing the same future, openly, fully, and without looking away. And on a quiet street in a neighborhood that had learned the difference between rules and compassion, between fear and community, between hiding and healing, that future stretched out before them like a perfectly mowed lawn, clean lines, careful attention, and room enough for both of them to grow.